Meet Multimod Rack, the
What
next
in the
level
hell
in
is that? Oh, that's my advert for my own. So I think that means we're on, doesn't it? My Streamlabs is saying that we're on 0 viewers, but I don't think that's true. Well, hello. Okay, yeah, we're on. Cool. So, first of all, I should probably let everyone know, I currently have no plans to be a streamer in any way. I'm just in between cameras at the moment and can't make any videos, so I just thought, why not fill the time by doing a stream on political violence, housing, and Dave Rubin. So at least 2 slightly heavy topics in there. Scottish brochure chat. Yes. Okay. Chat box looks fine. Can you all hear me well enough? I'm guessing you can. Critical Hippo, what movies have I used footage from that I haven't watched? Maybe a bit quiet, thank you, sir. Let's have a look. That's because of this piece of Right, so I don't really plan to stick too strongly to any of these topics. There were a few things that happened in the... Yeah, a couple of things that happened in the news I thought were quite interesting. And yeah, I thought I would go over a couple of things. The first topic I said I was going to mention was terrorism, probably political violence as well. I know someone just mentioned that in chat. Yeah, I think that'll come up. The reason I'm speaking about that is because I think a bunch of you know, I imagine most people will have heard of this already, is that 26th of July, a BLM protester called Garrett Foster was shot dead in Austin. What was kind of interesting about that story was, let me show you guys. Was that a certain Twitter user started putting out a conspiracy theory that Garrett was shooting at people, and the people who attacked, who ended up killing him, were shooting back in self-defense. That turned out not to be true, but nonetheless, it was a narrative that was retweeted by none other than Donald Trump. And that really got me wondering, perspectives on political violence, why the media coverage is the way it is on violence, and maybe just going through a few of my own thoughts as well on it. Although this is actually one topic that I haven't completely made up my mind on yet, so I thought it would be a bit more refreshing if I just shared a few thoughts instead. When we're talking about political violence, first of all, I think if you are the kind of person who would maybe say something like, you abhor political violence, you're against any form of political violence, I think that basically is a sign of incoherent politics. What exactly do we mean by violence in general? So if you are, say if you're a homeless person and you have a choice with either being punched in the face on the street just by a little hoodlum, or going into a work and pension center and being found fit for work by purely because of very arbitrary and very unrealistic quotas set by the government. And you can't work. You're physically incapable of working, but you've been found fit for work and your welfare has been stripped of you. Which one of those two acts is more violent? Getting punched in the face or getting your means of subsistence taken away from you as part of arbitrary policy? Our immediate reaction is to see physical violence as that as the be all and end all. I think this really stems from a kind of misunderstanding of where exactly violence, like the role that violence plays in societies. So when I was a student, my very first day of college in a sociology class, when I was a little Zoomer, 2008, I was asked the question, we were all asked the question by our lecturer, what is society, right? We were given that meme. And the answer I gave was probably the dumbest thing you could say, but also probably the most predictable. I said something like, society is a system made up of the contribution of all various types of people with various skills and various qualities to create a whole that is society. My lecturer, who was a complete communist, one of the only ones the only one I came across actually, said, that sounds like a very functionalist point of view. And I thought, immediately, I didn't know what functionalist meant, but immediately I just went, yeah, there's maybe something wrong with that, because a functionalist is someone who sees society as this perfectly functioning amalgamation of different institutions, each servicing and complementing the other. It's a sort of this bone connected to that bone. It's very rudimentary. And the problem with that is it kind of gives you, it sort of connotes an idea of harmony. It presupposes that everything is functioning in a state of balance. And violence, through that lens, would be seen as something that disturbs the equilibrium. And that's why people would say they oppose violence. But what if, wait, before I get into that, maybe if you were to incorporate violence into that theory, you would say there is something called, say, means of production for producing value that's owned by certain people. There is also what you would call the means of violence, the means of the actual ability to use physical force, the guns, the artillery, and the legal rights to use violence. That would be the police. Okay, I'm backwards. The police, they're over there. Bad take on, I'll get into that, don't worry. So that's the idea of the police, that they are the monopoly over the means of violence, and it is their role. They're the ones who are legally allowed to use violence to generally keep everyone else safe from it. So, what if that so-called harmony that we live in only exists on the basis of violence? What if the system that we live in depends on someone somewhere getting, not even legally, having the shit beaten out of them, or suffering, being dispossessed, being robbed? And we all know that quite a lot of what we consume comes from, say, sweatshops in China, where people jump off, where they have to build safety nets for people jumping off out of the buildings of the workplaces. So that is what appears to be a system of equilibrium that depends on instability and depends on violence. So are we not actually living in a state of, to paraphrase something like Gore Vidal put it, a state of perpetual war for perpetual peace? And I think if you imagine what kind of people in society hold that position, that society is functioning and anything that threatens that equilibrium is actually what violence is, that would be the idea, that would be the mindset of conservatives, and especially the police. The police are full on, I wouldn't call them functionalists, but functionaries, that's the word. A functionary is like someone who assumes that it's all, everything fits in its right place. So if you look at it through that lens, then certain types of violence that function are going to be sanitized in a way that types of violence that break that are going to be looked down upon. So a good example would be the Iraq War, when pretty much every politician, every now and then, when there was some controversy around the anti-war protesters or the fact that it was supposed to be a humanitarian intervention that just looked quite a lot like an invasion, politicians would come out and give their spin and say that it was things like that they were doing. They would use these very Orwellian terms like surgical targeting. They would talk about the care that goes into the weapons that they used. They would talk about how they had these drones that could target a mouse that lived on the moon, that kind of thing. So they believe that really. So they put out that when it came to violence in that sense. But when protesters, say today, are defacing a statue, not hurting anyone, that is violence, insurrection, terrorism. So I wouldn't actually say it's logically inconsistent for them to do that. That fits the narrative that they work with. And that fits because to them, and indeed in reality, the way, how would you put it? Attacking statues to them is actually more violent than a drone strike that accidentally blows up a school in Iraq. It's more threatening to them to deface statues than it is to hear about some malpractice of the military. So there's always a bias on what is violent and what kinds of violence should be taken more seriously, which ones should be paid more attention to, etc. Now, on top of that, you could also say, what if the means of violence and the people who control the means of violence are also political? What if there is no such thing as an apolitical force in the middle that is just there, like robotically assessing each person on their utilitarian threat to other people? What if the police, and probably the National Guard as well, you could say, have always been involved in, have always had political leanings? The police in the UK were started by a man called Robert Peel. That's why in British slang they're called bobbies, right? Because his name's Robert Bobbies. And incidentally, Robert Peel didn't just found the police, he also founded the Conservative Party. The Metropolitan Police in London was started by the same guy that started the Tory Party. So they've been political from the get-go, and their first role as keepers of the peace was to quell urban protests. And their primary function, at least then and as we're about to find out today, is to protect the private property rights of the capitalist class. Now, a good example of us, I might as well give an example to back that up. In 2012, when Occupy Wall Street happened, I'm sure if you look for any footage of Occupy Wall Street, you will see lots and lots of footage of cops kettling people, burning down, or no, not burning down, but clearing the places that they'd set up, even though it was public space. Suddenly the public weren't allowed in public spaces. Clearing out people, trashing the libraries, the public libraries that they built outdoors. A cop just going through a group of protesters who were all sitting down cross-legged and walking in a line, pepper spraying them, just ritualistically, not giving a shit. You never saw that response from the other side of political uprising that happened at that time, which was from the Tea Party. And the Tea Party would turn up with guns. They would march on Capitol Hill with guns. And the cops stayed out of there. The reason they did that was because if you are a functionary, if you believe that society is nothing more than a group of individual cogs serving a greater machine that is there to benefit the good of everyone, then Occupy was more violent and more threatening than the people who marched on the White House with guns. So, because violence is viewed through the lens of the system, is it not feasible then that threats of violence will not be judged on the absolute threat they pose to humanity, but to the threat that they pose to the system? That's kind of where I am on that for the moment. Which brings us to the topic of terrorism. Terrorism, obviously, I suppose the definition would be using violence to achieve a political goal or to disrupt the public psyche. Committed by non-state actors using threats or violence to achieve political ends. The reason I'm bringing up terrorism is there was a study. I'm going to share a study with you guys that came out 2 days ago. And it was one of very few, actually, independent studies that compares left and right-wing terrorism over a number of decades in the United States. So, I'm going to flip my screens around. There we go. Let's have a look at this. And there is a very similar study to this that came out from the ADL. I know that some people have problems with the ADL because I think they maybe have a bit of a leaning towards the state of Israel. I don't really know much about that. But also, if you're trying to make this argument to a right-winger, then obviously the ADL are Jewish. So, definitely not that. This group is called the, what does that stand for again, CSIS? The Center for Strategic and International Studies. Now, what they did was they compiled over 900 terrorist plots and attacks in the United States between January 1994 and May 2020. This was mostly done with a focus on the Boogaloo movement and all the responses to the George Floyd killings, the Proud Boys, etc. What they found was that, where are the conclusions? That here we go, here's the chart. So that green thing there is what they would call left-wing terrorism. So that blue one is right-wing. For some very odd reason, they put ethno-nationalist as a separate color. For the purposes of this, that's not really going to matter, but they did that. And then, of course, religious, which encompasses, it would be a combination of Islamic and Christian fundamentalists. So I would say that's right-wing in both senses, but again, we'll probably not need to worry about that too much. So, as you can see, left-wing terrorism in the United States, according to these people, was quite dominant around this time, 2000s to about, we could say 2005. I think that would be mostly related to the, what would that be? The anti-war movement. And before that, anti-globalization protests. That was a really big thing back then. The thing that they say here, the increase in left-wing activity 2000-2005, most of them targeted property associated with animal research, farming, or construction, and were claimed by the Animal Liberation Front or the East, or the Earth Liberation Front. So anti-globalization, animal rights, all those kind of things, which are, yeah, surprisingly, with the rise of veganism, no one really does that anymore. So where is the, I swear I had this. Yeah, right-wing contribution to terrorism in the US has been increasing basically since the early 2000s. It made up 2/3 of the attacks in the United States in 2019, and over 90% 90% this year. So can go back down here. Right-wingers tend to have a nice big authority, dominion, whatever, monopoly over terrorism in the United States. The thing I like about this study compared to the ADL and a few other ones is they, I think, are quite in the know with their definitions. Because if you look down here, where are their broader definitions? Here we go. So, the deliberate use or threat of violence by non-state actors in order to achieve political goals and to create a broad psychological impact. Violence and the threat of violence are important components of terrorism. Overall, this analysis divides terrorism into 4 broad categories: right-wing, left-wing, religious, and ethno-nationalist. To be clear, terms like right-wing and left-wing terrorism do not in any way correspond to the United States, such as Republican and Democratic parties. So yeah, there's a very centrist think tank. They're definitely not going to link people like Ian Miles Chung to Donald Trump. Playing it safe, I suppose. So, this definition of right-wing terrorism refers to the use of threat or violence by subnational or non-state entities, whose goals may include racial or ethnic supremacy, opposition to government authority, anger at women, including from the incel movement, good, and outrage against certain policies such as abortion. This analysis uses the term right-wing terrorism rather than racially and ethnically motivated extremism, which is used by some in the US government. So that, I think, is a very, very good consolidation of what right-wing terrorism is, especially because of bringing in the incel thing, because I know this was contested for a long time, but there are quite a lot of very good I mean, it's always been the case through history that is what I think the ADL, actually, this was one of the good things that they did publish on this, was the intersection of racism, xenophobia, and misogyny. The way that those two always interact and always have. Fascists have always had a very hypermasculine, very misogynistic tendency within their movement, even when they're being nice to women. It's always, for example, a very good example was the EDL, the English Defence League. What they would do was to recruit women into their movement was that they would name the female members the EDL angels, and they would deliberately try to get a hold of people who were in things like abusive households or just were generally alienated. So they had a very kind of creepy sort of white knight approach when it came to women. So it definitely does. Yeah, the right wing are very intersectional in that sense. I mean, it's not quite the same thing as intersectionality. It's they consolidate hatred for women and hatred for foreigners quite well. Apparently, I need mods for my chat. It's a shame I have no idea how to do that. If anyone knows how to manage moderators, this will be fun. It's a good thing I'm not making segments, because I think I need to get a bit better at this to do that. Oh, who knows, man? There's no way I'm getting that. No way. Get out of there. See, what's fun now, though, is I have no idea who's going to be a mod. Not Libraven. You're the guy who's in Voss chat every now and then saying some like dumb shit. Let's have a look. Whatever. We'll figure that out later. I mean, if there are a bunch of well, thanks, Libraven. If there are any like nutters in chat, I guess I'll just keep talking to them because I quite enjoy wasting their time. Um, so, where was I? Right. So they've been, yeah. So the right wing have been basically monopolizing terrorism in the U.S. for, I would probably say, let's just give a very generous since 2014. What could that relate to? Well, first of all, the fact that it's much easier for right wing terrorism to sustain itself in somewhere like the United States or even, I suppose, Europe because of the connection that they have to the police. The police are fundamentally a reactionary organization. They've always they were started by the person who founded the Conservative Party in the UK, and they do operate under a very right-wing viewpoint that there are good guys in society and there are bad guys. It's very, very simplistic, very militarized, very kind of Batman dumb fuck kind of approach. So there have been plenty of warnings from the FBI for the last decade of right-wing people infiltrating the cops in America. 25 years ago, the warning was made by, actually, since when this study started taking logs, was this warning was made by Rage Against the Machine. Some of those who work forces are the same that burn crosses. In the UK, it's actually quite typical for police officers to go through courses where they have to learn about Marxism and how to deal with it. In the UK, where there's apparently a massive threat of Marxist violence, the cops have to learn how to deal with Marxism. So, are the fascists still in the chat? Whatever. We'll deal with that another time. Anyone in Discord trying to? If someone I know who knows that I know them is in chat, maybe go into the Discord and give me a message, and then I can find a way to. Whatever. We'll enjoy their company. So, what we might have to do then with this, and I think this study does go a little bit into it, although this was something I kind of had covered already, was why is right-wing terror taking this massive increase? It could partly be to do with the fact that we have a president who is, well, they have a president who is retweeting reactionary propaganda and conspiracy theories about people who are being attacked by right-wingers and by the police. It could also be with the fact that with the massive growth of fringe right-wing media, because most of the people behind these attacks, in particular the more high-profile ones, always have a very relative there's quite an overlap with what they believe, and not to mention what their sources are. When I saw that the Christchurch shooter had released a manifesto, I went and had a look at it, and I just thought, this is the most familiar, predictable, badly written version of something that is all over the internet. And what? Yeah, is all over the internet and is all over the media. So we have a connection between what you would call stochastic terrorism, which is when you have the increased likelihood of lone wolf fighters who. I'm getting very distracted by these people who are, I can't tell, are trying to protect me from the chat Nazis. I'm just going to leave them in there. You can have a discussion. It's fine. Zach said Islamic terrorism does count as religious in this study. As we're about, let's go into that actually, because this is probably my favorite part of this study, and it's something that should be very obvious. Hey, right wingers, fucking fascists, trolls, whatever, groypers, whoever the fuck you are in the chat, pay attention to this. This is good for you. Let's learn about who your brothers are. Third, right-wing extremists have adopted some foreign terrorist Third, right-wing extremists have adopted some foreign terrorist organization tactics through Al-Qaeda, and other groups have also adopted tactics developed by right-wing movements. In a June 19 online post, a member of the Atomwaffen division, no illusions there, stated the culture of martyrdom and insurgency within groups like the Taliban and ISIS is something to admire and reproduce in the neo-Nazi terror movement. Similarly, the Base, a loosely organized neo-Nazi accelerationist movement which shares the English language name for Al-Qaeda, uses a vetting process to screen potential recruits, similar to the methods of Al-Qaeda. Now, when I was a very edgy, shit for brains teenager, whole person, I'll link the study. Let's have a look. Because it was actually, it was hard to find the link for that. Yes, when I was a shitbag, skull measuring, whatever person, where are we? Where the fuck did I put it? Here we go. As well as listening to whoever those weird fucking, there weren't that many of them, race realists at the time, but I would occasionally, just out of, I don't know, dumb fuck curiosity, listen to people like Bin Laden and other terrorists as they gave their little speeches. When I started coming on YouTube last year, and saw the likes of Paul Joseph Watson and all those dudes, the things they talk about are so similar. Like, there's really, like, the way they talk about women is almost identical. The way that they talk about the decadence and the whatever, the femoid, the slutbaggery, all that shit, the pregnant before marriage, and the fetishization of abstinence, all that, they're very identical in the way they speak about that. The closest parallel you could catch between those guys is if you looked at the way that people like Paul Joseph Watson, especially him, talk about architecture, the way that they sort of relish in the old churches and the very classical and Gothic architecture of old, and then have this very very grim outlook on glassy, cold, modernist monuments that we have today. That is very identical to the way that ISIS recruitment people speak. If you notice, when terrorists do attack, they don't actually, when they attack the UK and America, they don't actually really ever target, although people like to talk about the religious war between Christianity and Islam, they don't attack Christian monuments. They attacked the World Trade Center. You know, the most ugly, out of place looking, glassy, modernist global financial center monument that they could find. They don't target churches. They target airports, underground stations, financial, like, modernist buildings. So they have when I first noticed that really struck me, because that was when I kind of started to realize that, yeah, those people in you, they're not so different, they and you. When I know they target, okay, James, I know they target churches more often in the locally in the Middle East, places like that, but yeah, when it comes to over here, they generally had a bit of a preference, which is very interesting parallel. let's look at the comparison now. The most interesting thing I noticed about this as well with left-wing terrorism is what they target. They tend to be much more likely to target things like property, attacking, especially with all the attacking the sort of police headquarters and attacking the smashing up Starbucks and things like that. There is also plenty of small businesses being destroyed and things like that. So naturally, you get a bit of issue on both sides there. But typically, that's a pretty interesting difference. There was actually, the reason they took 1994 is because that's actually, in that whole period, there was one death by Antifa, by someone who identified as an Antifa person. And the only person who died in that attack was the perpetrator. The guy who was attacking those concentration camps, the vehicles, who were the empty vehicles that were meant to bus the people to the camps. He was shot when he was trying to attack those. So the reason we're hearing a lot more about people who are generally attacking statues and things like that than we are about these genuine mean motherfuckers who are going for ethnic minorities, other political activists, etc., is because as far as a Trump presidency goes, and even probably most of the DNC, they are threatened much, much more by people in masks who are attacking corporate buildings and talking about police brutality than they are by this guy. Now, the amount of times I've seen people trying to say Antifa is a terrorist organization or trying to say that Antifa is an organization, let's maybe compare that on the terrorism scale to this old bloke. Let's have a look.
I started this gang called the Proud Boys. And
The Proud Boys?
The Proud Boys.
What's Proud Boys about?
We will kill you. That's the Proud Boys in a nutshell. We will kill you. We look nice. We seem soft. We have boys in our name. But like Bill the Butcher and the Bowery Boys, we will assassinate you. Now, part of the reason I agree to do the talk is because I'm allowed to bring all my guys. And we can fight our way in and fight our way out. Beating the shit out of these people. I think it's our job to do it. And the cops just turn a blind eye. If you're wearing a MAGA hat, as Sal is right now, Sal's in the studio, folks.
Oh my God, it's Sal Cipolla. Where are you from?
On here.
Wow, you came a long way.
If you're wearing a MAGA hat, and some guy with a slightly punk demeanor comes up to you and says, hey, are you Sal or are you pro-Trump? Choke him. Trust your instincts. Don't listen to what he has to say. Choke him. If I do a video where I say, how about we start throwing bricks? Is that legal? You can't call for violence on a specific person, but can you say they're throwing bricks? We should throw bricks. Can you call for violence generally? Because I am. Fighting solves everything. We need more violence from the Trump people, Trump supporters. Choke a motherfucker, choke a bitch, choke a tranny. Get your fingers around the windpipe. I want violence. I want punching in the face. I'm disappointed in Trump supporters for not punching enough. Get a fucking gun. Get ready to blow someone's fucking head off. I've even killed people in my dreams. That's how awesome my gun is.
Get in trouble, get arrested, get fired. Let's all get in this together. They can't kill us all.
I got green tips, man. Those go through at least 3 bodies.
Oh, beautiful.
Plop.
I love the way he falls on his ass.
They said, you want to go? I said, yeah, I want to fucking go. And I punched them in the face. And then Coulter emailed me later and she goes, conservatives never punched anyone in the face. Finally, things are turning around.
And then Mousberg goes, you're not advocating violence, are you? And I go, I absolutely am. It's a wonderful, effective thing.
This is a fucking war.
Not one death by Antifa. Not one clip of compilation of some LARPing, massively LARPing shitbag. And think about, I was like, when you think about the targets there, right? Like he's talking about targeting what? Democrats, anti-fascists, people of color, minorities. I know he's obviously not said that, but come on. Protesters, and the difference between the people who want to stop them. So, I wonder actually, since 233 people watching, that's fucking insane. Since there are quite a lot of fucking weirdos in the chat, I know someone wants to do a call-in one day, sir. Maybe Patrick Ellis, that's a very good question. We're going to talk about that right now. So I'm going to assume that if there are any, right? Yeah, Union Jacks, definitely. Okay, so let's talk about, I'm going to assume these are some people who haven't seen my videos, so I'm sorry if I repeat myself. Let's talk about how fascism, you know, people like this basically, were defeated. People like Gavin McInnes, people like that were defeated in the 1930s, 40s. First of all, the big F-bomb. First of all, we know that they were obviously defeated by violence. There was quite a lot of shots fired, Second World War. Maybe you could call them Antifa, I don't know. Well, the problem was in the early 30s, people always underestimate this, is just how popular the Nazis were outside of Germany. I mean, they were massively popular. They were obviously the king of England at the time, Edward VIII, was teaching his daughter the Sieg Heil Salute on video. He also taught his niece, who is none other than the current Queen of England right now, David Lloyd George, who led Britain in the First World War, led Britain against the Germans in the First World War, described Hitler as the greatest German that ever lived. They were backed by quite a lot of the media, Daily Mail for one, obviously. Why did that never take off? Actually, to think about student indoctrination, you know how people always complain about how academia is being infiltrated by postmodern neo-Marxists and pseudo-scientific intersectional theory, post-Frankfurt, etc. Students are being taught to convince women to stop having sex with gamers, that whole meme. Well, in the 30s, eugenics was probably being exported by the UK more than anywhere else. Student debating societies would hold debates on whether this house supported the Nazi Party after the Night of the Long Knives, after they were elected, and those debates would pass with a yes. So that's odd. And the reason they didn't really survive in the UK was because alongside them was also a very strong left-wing movement, anti-fascists. In my hometown, what those people would do was they would go and interrupt all their speeches, disconnect any cables if they brought speakers. Occasionally in Dundee, down in the middle of Scotland, they were physically chased out. They just ran them out of town when they tried to hold rallies. It was very difficult for them to assemble. It was very difficult for them to recruit because you could recruit from the media to an extent, but a lot of people were unemployed. They couldn't afford newspapers. You had to recruit people in the street. Fascist people could not do that. So they that was basically Antifa. Anti-fascist action that stopped fascism from taking any hold in the UK and obviously equipped this country and several others in Europe to actually defeat the Nazis in the end. Now, some of their techniques were pretty violent, not going to lie. My great-great-uncle would follow who was called the local Führer around, and he would kick him and stamp on his feet and steal his newspapers when he was trying to recruit people. One other thing that they would do was, if they saw a fascist selling papers, they would have one person stand in front of them and stare at them, just, come up to him, distract them. And while they were doing that, someone else would run behind them and set fire to their bundle of papers. So, pretty creative. The problem is, if you do that now, they didn't have, well, back then, they didn't really have the same people with iPhones willing to take videos of that, take them out of context, even leave them in context and try to play the victim card. They didn't really have that potential. So maybe that they do now. This is why I'm always a bit conflicted over, Antifa activists are fucking awesome, but they're also, when it comes to PR these days, when everyone has an iPhone and when most people are apolitical enough that they can't really tell the difference between a Nazi getting punched and an anti-fascist getting hit, it's a bit of a PR struggle. Not really sure where to go with that. But what it does show you is that absence of a left-wing alternative makes a very, very big distinction. Because in Germany, and this is where I'm going to kind of close this whole thing about political violence, is it only took one death by anti-fascists, only one. When let's have a look at him. When a young Nazi stormtrooper, that's not his name, is it? Hurst Wessel, there we go. I think he was, 20? He was very young, 23. Nazi stormtrooper, shot dead outside of his doorstep, on his doorstep, in the middle of the night by a bunch of communist activists. That, for the Nazis, was huge PR. They published that all over the country. They put his face up on posters, justice for Hearst, all that kind of shit. Basically, what it did was it allowed them to push this narrative, which they'd already been trying to push, was that the real threat to Weimar democracy was anti-fascists. Ironic. Because they feigned support for the Weimar state. Eventually, when the Reichstag burnt down, it was blamed on those communists, and communists had a bad name because of the Wessel incident. I'm not going to try and pronounce that right. That was, James Vass, but who was the bigger threat? Answer that. Go type, tell me who the bigger threat was, in hindsight at least. No, I'm not saying like the revolutionary wing. I'm talking about the anti-fascist wing, the wing that just wanted, because liberals did that as well. Liberal social democrats. I'm just talking anti-fascists, Mr. Vast. You don't have to if you don't want to. Unfortunately, I think a lot of what we have here with the left kind of getting blamed on all this and being sort of criminalized by the police. The issue we have right here is that it's kind of a bit of an accident, because everyone right now is currently going around in face masks. And the face masks before the COVID outbreak, were always inextricably linked to Antifa, to this stereotype image of an Antifa person. So this is actually like, as well as a right-wing nutcase of a president, this is like a really perfect constellation of good fortune for someone like Trump, because he now has the opportunity to call everyone who is standing against him an Antifa fighter, which is You couldn't have made that up. I think. Honestly, the aesthetic benefit of everyone being running around doing what they're doing in face masks is making it much easier to push this conspiracy theory of Antifa being behind everything, even though being in a face mask in no way makes you left wing or Antifa. It means you have a brain, which makes you more likely to be left wing, I suppose. But yeah, it's pretty lucky there. Pretty lucky there for Trump. I mean, his whole life is a story of luck, so I would say. Where could I finish this with? I've always wondered why this whole idea of attacking Nazis, attacking fascists, and why, especially when the Richard Spencer punch happened. First of all, I think the right wing reported on that a lot because it was the only example at the time they had of left wing violence on camera. They had nothing else apart from that, so they just spammed it across the internet. The reason I think it was so enjoyable for left wingers to watch is because philosophically there is a function in that whole aesthetic, because fascists, I can't remember the philosopher who said this, but fascists and right wingers in general like to pride themselves on an image of strength. That's their thing. That's their image, is that they're the strong man kind of thing. And when there is a flood of media showing you getting assaulted, getting punched, like when you have a picture of some dickhead Zeke Heiling, and then 1 second later he gets his face squished up by some big bugger, then like that is aesthetically really damaging to right wingers. That's why it like, it's not just cathartic, it looks really bad for them. It doesn't make them look like the bastions of strength that are going to save Western civilization. It creates doubt. It creates doubt that they've really got themselves under control. That's why if you ever watch Destiny debates, that's why his debates with right wingers land so much more well than the debates he had with the left. Because debating the right isn't just proving them wrong and all that. That side of it is fairly easy. It's the kind of motor breathed pow combo chat kind of emasculation that happens in front of the audience of the people who are watching that is really functional. It's not the arguments that make right wingers look bad in those debates. It's the lack of strength. It's the lack of ability to hold themselves up, to appear confident, especially when they get angry and they lose control. So that was the probably the sloppiest, most disconnected chat on violence. I probably missed out a few things, but how are we doing? How's chat? I'm not going to make a segment out of this. This is purely just me enjoying myself. So it's funny. The last time I was speaking, the chat actually made a bit of sense from what I was saying. But now it's completely unrelatable. What the fuck are they? The deaths that resulted from the BLM protests are blamed on the left. Yeah, Heinz, I know, I'm a fucking technophobe. Again, I'm not planning on being a professional streamer, you know? Social Justice, the musical. Yes. I mean, no, that would be so fucking embarrassing. Who's that guy who does the really embarrassing political music video where he does mainstream songs but just adds shitty political lyrics about why feminism's bad and why left-wingers are the real fascists? Who's that guy? Who's that fucking YouTube? Yeah, Chris Raygun. Yeah. No, fuck that. No way. Does Baked Alaska do that? No, I've heard that Chris Raygun is actually quite different from the shit that he used to put out. But yeah, no, he's always that political music, especially in the Political meme music as well. No way. That shit is fucking disgusting. No way. Sure, he's a nice guy, though. Seems like a nice guy. Whoa. I was going to talk about the evictions and housing. Wait. I know incels have been circle jerked to death, but could you do an explicitly Marxist? There is no Marxist analysis on incels, Swagger Lemon. I don't think. I don't think Karl Marx can quite explain incels. I'm trying to think if there's any way you could link that. Alienation, maybe. The sort of the commodification of human interaction, like the way that dating gets kind of depersonalized and I suppose looked at in the same way as commodities. I don't know. Fuck that, man. No way. No. But yeah, I guess like things like urban life and just the fast pace. People who are maybe more introverted or a bit less socially assertive can definitely struggle a lot more than people who are not. And that might have something to do with the pace that life moves at. I know there's definitely something about because, yeah, fuck it. Marxist material analysis of incels. I think I've got something. Maybe. Consumption under capitalism, profit seeking. So basically it's about selling things. Easy enough. As capitalism grows, the more it needs to grow. If capitalism's about profit, it's about growth. Because in order to have a society that you want to invest your money in, you need there to be general growth happening. So, as societies, capitalist societies start to grow, as economies start to grow, the need to grow exponentially increases. With that, you might notice that companies start to do certain things that get their consumers to come back more often. A good example is if you've ever been to your grandmother's house and you sometimes see that she's got like old cutlery that has probably existed in the family for like 100 years, like very vintage stuff and like very old plates and stuff like that. That's not really an accident because things that used to get built for last are no longer viable. Now, the mantra for capitalists is to produce things that break. This is going to link to incels, I promise. The thing that actually first started with planned obsolescence was with light bulbs. The original ones had really thick filaments, and they could last for probably a few thousand years. No, not thousand. They over 100 years, decades. There is actually a light bulb in a Liverpool fire station that I once went to that has been burning since about 1920. So that's not viable if you're a capitalist. You shrink the filaments and you make them planned obsolete. So every time you have to pay for new light bulbs, you can thank capitalism for that. The other thing that goes with planned obsolescence is entertainment. Novelists in the 18th and 19th century would often only write 1 or 2 books every 10, 20 years. Like, it was really, people like Dickens and Shakespeare and all that actually stood out for the fact that they wrote so much, but quite a lot of people didn't really write so much. If you get like Edgar Allan Poe, a complete collection of him, it's tiny. Didn't need to write that much. Now it's people getting pressure to write 1 every couple of years. And if you disappear from that, people think you died, you know? Probably that flow happening on left-wing YouTube is that the prepared content of people like Sean and ContraPoints and PhilosophyTube has been replaced by this kind of gold rush of streamers with Vosh and Xanderhall and all those, and streamers, people who, because you can consume stuff instantly. The impact that that has on dating and relationships is that there is this kind of constant people need to feel like they need to be quite quick with it. There's there's a kind of filtering system. It's not really, people don't really have as much time to get to know each other and develop closer relationships. So what happens is you get this kind of socially you get this kind of fetishization of or elevation of people who can make impressions very quickly and very effectively. It's what you call the age of the likable fellow, you know, the public speaking kind of thing. And if you can't do that, if you're a bit introverted or autistic or something like that, then yeah, it's going to be the amount of space that you've got to form relationships, not just with fucking women, just with anyone. It shrinks. And yeah, and if you try to make impressions quickly and it's not very natural to you, then that's the worst thing, right? Nothing worse than someone who is not a public speaker trying to present themselves as a super confident public speaker. Definitely. So that's my on the spot take on why capitalism is not good for incels. I wish they fucking knew that, though. They always seem to get groomed over by the right, where it turns out there are quite a lot of men. Oh yeah, definitely, Miss Patrick Ellis. Yeah, definitely. They're a lot more visible. I mean, fucking what? Ted Bundy was an incel, right? Effectively, he had the same impression. The best incel advice I ever heard was when I fucking was when I saw when I used to watch The Golden One for fun. I used to watch his like stupid fucking videos, and there was one thing when he was asked by a fan who was depressed how they get out of their depression, and he did this fucking stupid like, okay, I'm going to give you 3 quests, and then the 3 quests he gave them was one like improve your bench press by 5 kilograms in the next month or some shit like that, and then the other one was like read 5 books or something. Yeah, read 5 books in a month. And then the last one he said was get a girlfriend. And I thought, well, that's fucking stupid. Like, that's not really like the way to look at women. But when he went into it, he started saying, I don't actually mean go out and try and find someone to be a girlfriend, but just go out and speak to people, speak to women, just to speak to them. Just speak as if you're speaking to like you're speaking to people. Just have a pointless conversation with them. Because that's how you build relationships with people. The only time you get stuck in that is if you start looking at it as like a cost-benefit analysis, or you start worrying about the next thing you're going to say, or whether what the perfect combination of words is to get into this person's pants and all that nonsense. Like, yeah, absolutely. Like the Golden One was completely based on incels for 3 seconds before he went back to shooting people in video games and calling them Jews. So I'm going to leave out evictions. That's going to be a whole massive thing. Fuck that. What do I think of an armed pop? I don't know. I'm Scottish. Like, the police aren't armed, really. It's really hard for me to have an opinion on that. I know Karl Marx was for it. So, whatever. How are we doing, chat? There's still about 200 of you in here, so that's pretty fucking cool. Barely. Tesseract Illusion, they are barely armed. They tend to, they actually, even their uniforms, they look like t-shirts almost. They look like shirts with the buttons and like the little T's, and that's it. They look very underdressed, and it's always, I think the policy is always it's got to be a male officer and a female officer when they patrol together. I don't know why that is. I think maybe the presence of female police officers pacifies the public, but yeah, they seem to be quite tame here. I mean, they do have problems. I don't know much about the English ones. The London ones they look like Terminators. They're fucking nuts. But, and Europe's obviously worse for that. So, Is Kant an empiricist or not? I do not know. I've never read Kant. He was a racist who never left his own town. I probably should have a look at him one day. There was one thing that Kant said about empirical truth. He did say that the real truth was something that we would never be able to achieve. We'd never be able to know what that is, but what we can see is this kind of like projection that it puts on us. But that's been a while. That's a long time in the past. I'm not going back into that. Tell you folks what I'm going to do. It's been an hour. I'm going to. Why did my light color keep changing? That's not right. I'm going to get my headphones through and also go to the bathroom because I drank too much water here. My light is really not playing ball. Yes, I will be back in one moment, and then then we're gonna do Dave Rubin doing 1984. That's gonna be fun. Okay. It's interesting when you go for a bathroom break, you start to learn the metrics involved in relieving yourself. 10 people left the chat when I went to the bathroom, 5 of which have come back or are new people. Amazing. Okay. Let's learn about George Orwell and 1984. I have not seen this video. I'm sure a couple of you have heard of it. Where on earth is it? I will grab it and then I will put you guys onto my screen. Okay, get the fuck in. Tell me how the levels are. I will be reading you on my other screen. Let's have a look. Fucking, go away.
Yeah.
Fuck off.
We've
Go away. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Before we start, 1984. What the fuck is that about? Yeah, it's the Audio Technicas, Alex. Yeah. So what the fuck is 1984? I read it once, about 10 years ago when I was 19 years old. What the fuck is 1984 about? It's a story about a man called Winston Smith, who lives in a dystopian world. The book was written in 1948, hence 1984. It is a sort of, I guess you could say, prediction for the future when society is basically fully controlled by a very authoritarian regime. It's everyone's watched all the time on TV screens. There are 3 countries left in the world. I think one is Eurasia, one is Oceania, the other one is something else. It's very known for its cult references. You've got the Ministry of Love, which is where people are tortured into loving the regime. Big Brother, obviously, which was turned into a insane reality TV show in the United Kingdom for a little while. It's doublethink, the way that people talk about, what could you say with doublethink? Double standards in the media, that kind of thing. Possibly how Trump will retweet right-wing terrorist sympathizers while trying to designate the opposition to those terrorists as terrorists. That's probably kind of doublethink. You have thought crime. More on that one later. And without giving too much away, the whole premise of the story is to basically try and coerce someone into the point that they will genuinely believe that 2 + 2 = 5. Eduardo with the $5. Thank you very much, sir. Okay. I need to stop assuming people's genders on the internet. Anyway. Oh, fun thing about 1984. George Orwell is probably one of the most bastardized, misunderstood writers ever. He was a socialist for most of his life, as far as I know. He went to Spain in the 1930s to fight against the fascists, the fascist regime of General Franco. He was a socialist, but later on in his life, he was particularly opposed to the kind of Soviet supporting side of the Communist Party. I think he denounced certain people as being linked to the Soviet Union or just as communists. He denounced them to the state during the whole Red Scare. He actually wrote 1984 not as a prediction of where capitalism would go. It was his prediction of the Soviet Union. He believed that the Soviet Union had become so tyrannical and so powerful that they had the power to convince people, to make people genuinely believe that 2 + 2 was 5. That was his thing. That was his sort of assertion, was that it was a kind of like a brainwashing movement happening in the Soviet Union. Now, Orwell was wrong on both fronts, I would say. 1984 is actually, I don't think it's a very good book for saying, for predicting where there is some stuff. The tally screens and the surveillance, United Kingdom, most watched country in the world. But most of the whole premise of a society being governed by fear didn't really happen. A much better analogy than 1984, although probably not as good as a story. 1984 is a great story, but for a better parallel to real life would be A Brave New World. Aldous Huxley's novel about how society is instead governed by a system of keeping people satisfied, keeping people pleased. The main sort of tool of doing that is a drug in the book called Soma, which puts you into a kind of into a sort of sleeping state of bliss. And I just think with consumerism and all the kind of whatever social media memes, then Brave New World is much more accurate. Orwell is the kind of guy that you see being referenced by fucking idiots who, the kind of boomers who they watched Black Mirror twice and now they'll compare every new technology they're not familiar with, self-service checkouts, toasters, to something from Black Mirror or 1984. It's also completely misused by people on the right who are winning politically more than they have been in the last 4 or 5 decades, but still think they're being suppressed. So that's my prediction, I think, for this film. I think he's going to be kind of right with the whole 1984 as a prediction of the threats of the Soviet Union and of communism. That is what Orwell was going for, not based, very cringe. But yeah, he's going to compare a lot of things that have nothing to do with what's in 1984, and he's going to compare that to his own life. You know, every time Tommy Robinson got arrested, or every time Trump got in trouble for tweeting something stupid, or every time someone had a lot of criticism from their fans, you know, you get these people coming out with more Orwell references than the entire collected works of George Orwell. I think we're going to see quite a bit of that. We're going to see a lot of comparing the left to doublethink, diversity is strength, all that shit. Fuck it. Let's watch the video. It's 30 minutes long. I'm very excited. Okay. Are we all ready, chat? I can just about see you on my laptop where I'm watching the stream back. Talk to me. Tell me you want to see Dave Rubin doing a book review on 1984. Let's go. Okay. Educate us, PragerU.
Welcome back to the book club. I'm Michael Knowles. The book this month, very timely, 1984 by George Orwell. But first, in our fast-paced world, it is tough to make reading a priority. We all know that. Well, at least it used to be. But at thinker.org, they summarize the key ideas from new and noteworthy nonfiction, giving you...
I love it that PragerU needs to direct its fans to Spark Notes effectively. What the fuck? Thinker.org. Is this one of their own ones? Is this a PragerU editorial? No, this is just something they're sponsored by, isn't it? No more in no time. That's fucking funny. For a book that people in high school read. You can read 1984 in, what, 2 or 3 days? Maybe, well, you can read it in 1 day if you want. Fucking hell, okay.
Access to an entire library of great books in bite-sized form. You can read or listen to hundreds of titles in a matter of minutes, from old classics like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, to recent bestsellers like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. If you want to challenge your perceptions, if you want to expand your horizons, most importantly, if you want to sound smart at parties, go to thinker.org. That is THIN.
Fuck. Okay. If you want to sound smart. They really know their audience, don't they? They know the kind of fucking people who sound. What did someone say? What happened? Is the sound okay? Or did I just go too loud? Oh, sound smart. Okay, if you want to sound smart, yeah. Fucking hell, man. The people who want to... remember when Charlie Kirk did that thing about how he was pretending to have read Plato and Aristotle and Rousseau, saying that there was a link from Plato to Rousseau to the modern left, how Plato was against the nuclear family, and how Aristotle had to correct him and say he's pro-nuclear family. Yeah. Anyway. That's really popular, though. I know that when the right do that, when like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and all that will get into a room and talk philosophy, like people really like that. Like people who I've known who are fans of those people, they like that whole kind of feeling. Maybe there's not enough of that on the left. Maybe the left doesn't do enough book clubs. Because fun fact, actually, all the stuff that this fucking guy is telling his fans to pretend to have read, we've actually read. Anyway.
KR.org. No E. No time for that. To start a free trial and put your mind in motion. Here to help me understand the world we're living in. I'm sorry, I mean 1984 by George Orwell. The great Dave Rubin. Dave, thank you for being here.
Knowles, it's good to be with you. I mean, that is not a joke, what you just started there. This is the world we are living in.
I want you to
I was
tell
thinking
me.
of calling you Winston, and you can call me Winston throughout this. We should just call each other Winston.
We are living
because
in-
we're all Winston now.
Yes. Winston, the protagonist of 1984.
Dave Rubin. Winston. The guy who knew that he was risking his life just to get into a bit of peace and fresh air. In the book, yeah, Winston rents a room. Sorry, spoilers. No, that's not really a spoiler. That's fucking really early in the, yeah, he risked his life just for a bit in the beginning. Yeah. Winston, we're all Winston.
Tell me if this sounds to you
Yes.
like a paragraph of a novel or like a news story about our world right now.
Wait, before you even read the quote, you could literally pick any quote
Yes.
from the book, and it is applicable now. So whatever you're going to
You're right.
say,
No, you're right.
I am going to agree, but I will jump off.
I've noticed
after-
this one actually, some people have been picking up on this. 1984 is having a sort of renaissance
It
these
is.
days.
Yeah.
Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book has been rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. And that process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right.
Sounds like life on Twitter.
Yes.
Right? I mean, an endless present. And that was part of what the system was trying to do. The Ministry of Truth, and Winston worked there, and he was one of the people that was basically using language.
I haven't watched this video. There are definitely going to be spoilers. So I'm very sorry. To be honest, if you know everything that happens in 1984, it's still all right. This is quite good to me. I'm enjoying this.
Language to confuse people. He was intentional. I mean, that was the whole purpose of all of this, was to get people to question everything, right?
Well,
what is 2 + 2 equal again? I mean, this was the ultimate purpose.
I want to get to this language point, because I think this is the real key. I'll just a quick summary for those of you who haven't read it yet. And if anyone hasn't read it, I guess you're getting the real life experience of it, but it's still worth reading to help you understand, especially your world right now. It's about Winston. As you say, Winston is this guy. He's living in a totalitarian state called Oceania.
Yep.
It's all run by one party. He's in the outer party. He's still in the party, but he's in the outer party. There's the inner party that really runs things. He works at the Ministry of Truth. What does the Ministry of Truth do? Spreads lies.
Spreads lies.
Rewrites the past.
Branding. It's all about branding.
It's all about
right?
branding. They have this area where they torture political dissidents.
Like when the president retweeted a conspiracy theory about an Antifa activist who was shot by right-wing extremists.
What's it called? The Ministry of Love. And they're, the totalitarian government is referred to as Big Brother. Big Brother is always watching you through screens, through TV cameras, always monitoring you. Winston has this sort of illegal love affair with this girl, Julia, and they're just trying to escape this modern totalitarian madness. Finally, they're caught out.
Doesn't end well.
Does not end well for him. And then, as you just alluded to, at the very end, they're torturing him and trying to break his spirit and trying to break his mind. How do they do it?
He fears rats, and they put basically a contraption on him with rats, and they're trying to, in effect, get him to sort of out himself and her and the people that are rebelling, in essence. And he basically points to her and causes them to put the rat trap on her, and
sells her out.
That's sort of what we're dealing with right now.
Well,
I mean,
and there's also this.
How are we dealing with that? What is the... Just like today, yeah, we're getting tortured and forced to denounce our lovers to the state torturing machine. What the fuck? What's he comparing that to? Is that about how he sold out his friends at the Young Turks to make a 6-figure salary for letting racists say whatever they want with no interruption? Heinz, nothing is low-hanging fruit to me. You clearly think too much of me.
This point, once he says, go get her, go get her, there's this intellectual admission where they say, what is 2 + 2?
Yeah.
And what is 2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah, no.
5. You have to say, you have to believe that 2 + 2 = 5.
Look, everything, it's so bizarre to see this. right now because, or to read this. So I originally read the book, I think I was in 11th grade. So this is like 92 or something like that, 93. It's a long time ago. And then I reread it over the last couple months. And, on Twitter, it's like everything that we're seeing, nothing means anything anymore. The way words are constantly used, or everything that we hear, without making this too political to the day right now. So much of it is hard not to, but so much of what we hear about from the left is exactly what 1984 is about. So words are violence now, but violence is not violence. These are things that they create.
Words, okay. Words are violence, but violence is not violence. I'm going to say with words, he's probably meaning what, like hate speech, things like that. Anyone who thinks words are not violence, okay? How do I put this? How do I put words are not violence? Okay, consider the phrase, hello, how are you today? Probably not that violent. Quite a nice thing to say to someone. Say it in the workplace. Not violence, not in any way. Now, what if someone says that for once every 10 minutes for the whole day? What if you say that to someone once every 10 minutes? Hi, how are you today? For an entire day. What if you say it to someone that you've asked out and they've turned you down and you work with them? What if you're saying it to an ex, texting it to them? Is that not? Words can do quite a lot more than people think. And I think, especially since Dave Rubin has obviously spent quite a few years platforming people whose words have inspired terror attacks, then when that guy walked into New Zealand and gunned down 50 Muslims because he believed that that the white population was being ethnically replaced by Muslims who breed like rabbits, when exactly did the violence begin? Did it begin when he pulled the trigger? Did it begin when he did the manifesto? Or did it begin when people started pumping out that theory online? When Lawrence Southern or Douglas Murray or James Alsop or any of these people started saying those things to them? You know what else is a good way to put this? This is a good one for the incels, actually. I'm not going to digress too much from this, don't worry. Good one for the incels. Sexual encounters. We know that most sexual encounters you end up in are not precipitated by the words, would you like to have sex now? Right? So, but they're still consensual. We do that with words that don't actually mean what they mean. For example, very good film. How do I spell his name? This scene. If you're an incel, this scene will teach you everything about how words work.
Do you want to come up for a coffee?
I don't drink coffee.
I haven't got any.
Now, they are not talking about coffee, are they? Coffee had nothing to do with that conversation. When people like Trump responded to Charlottesville saying, when he responded to Charlottesville saying good people on both sides, or when he tweeted out something that got removed from Twitter for potentially being an incitement to violence, when Count Dankula, for example, I'm sure he doesn't mean it. When he does his little Nazi jokes on stream and things like that. He's not telling any of his fans to go out and commit violence. When Tommy Robinson calls himself I think he calls himself a liberal or a center-left, I'm sure he said that. When he says that, but then spends all of his content talking about the threat of Muslims and how Muslims are coming in to rape white women, etc., he's not telling them to commit any violence, but he is asking them to come up for coffee.
To actually make us question everything. And then once you question everything, well, then gender is up for question, and all of the things that should be settled are no longer settled. And then what I completely forgot about that I found was interesting is that one of the things that they're also trying to sort of untie, that the Ministry of Truth is trying to untie, is the idea of time. And it does feel like right now that time feels a little weird. It's partly because of the lockdown, partly because, you know, we're trapped at home, we're all on social media. But doesn't time feel sort of strange right now? Like anything could happen at any given minute.
Right.
And I think that all leads to a sort of, well, sick society where 2 + 2 eventually will be 5 if they just tell you.
There are so many of these contradictions or absurdities that come up. I mean, the 3 slogans of the party that you've always got to repeat. They've got it on the back of the book right here. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. This could be the chants of protesters that we see marching all around the West.
Quite.
We've definitely we've definitely seen a bit of how war is peace, I guess, with what I was talking about earlier, with the way that what appears as a functional liberal democracy depends on violence happening all over the world. I'm not sure how exactly it compares to the BLM protests. Might have missed me on there. I think, unfortunately, this is just going to be a lot of vague gesturing and not many normative claims, not many concrete connections between 1984 and the left, because there isn't really.
Literally, I mean, one of the things that I talk about all the time now is that it's the anti-racists who are the racists
right
now, right? If all the people that are running around now proclaiming that the rest of us are racists, they're the ones that are pushing racism into society everywhere. They're the ones that are saying black people should have special dorms and that white people shouldn't, you know, be allowed to have certain jobs, or that they shouldn't be considered equally. Those are racist notions. So we.
Very good quote from Karl Marx. There is nothing worse than the equal treatment of unequals. So, not that I'm saying black people and white people are not equal, of course they are, but as far as where we all start in life, there is an inequality, because the connection is actually very easy to draw. If you start with, say from Jim Crow, say from the ending of Jim Crow in 1960s, Civil Rights Movement, say everyone from then on is legally, or just in every sense, say everyone is treated equally by the law, by employers, everything from then on. The problem is, one group of people starts with a very long history of wealth and relative privilege that black people don't. And if you're in a society that has very, very, very low levels of social mobility, like America does, then that system is going to perpetuate itself. That's why affirmative action exists. That's why Martin Luther King supported affirmative action. Anyway.
We live in a time where everything has been flipped, and for the few of us that have a little bit of the spark of Winston, it's like, how do you make sure you're not one of the people who at the end is going 2 + 2 = 5? I'm not sure. I will tell you one other thing. I'm actually watching The Handmaid's Tale right now. Did you watch it by any chance?
I did. I've seen some of it, not the whole thing.
So I'm watching it right now, and the parallels to 1984 are absolutely incredible, because this is exactly what the main character, June, is going through. And it's so funny because the show came out a couple of years ago and everyone kept saying, this is what's happening in Trump's America. Yeah. Except I'm watching it now in the midst of, you know, what's happening with Black Lives Matter and everything else. And it's like, no, it's all the left.
It's this America.
It's this America. It's not
wing,
Trump that's doing this. It's the other guys that are doing this.
Who's doing the violence again? See that blue line? That is right-wing terror attacks and plots since about 2015. See that one there? That's the left-wing violence. Anyway.
So I think more than anything else, there's a beautiful thing when you read a work of fiction when you can go, holy cow. This was not only, it must have been true or true enough to have made sense when it was written. What year was the book written?
The book was, I guess, written in 1948, published, I think, in 1949.
Okay, so 49. I mean, think about that, 70 plus years ago. But yet feels like literally everything we're going through right now.
Yeah.
That's an incredible compliment to a writer and to a work.
And he articulates this concept. I mean, I think the great one you use is that the people who say they're anti-racist are the ones who are acting in a racist way. And the way George Orwell describes it is he calls it doublethink.
Mm-hmm.
So doublethink is this idea that you hold two contradictory ideas at exactly the same time. So you can never admit that the ideas don't make any sense. But so for instance, we have to get rid of America's terrible past, which had segregation. And the way we're going to do that is institute segregation.
Through segregation. Look, think about it this way. What's like the hottest book on the left right now? It's White Fragility.
Yes.
What's the subtitle of White Fragility? I don't know what it is exactly, but in essence, it's something like how white people can blah, blah, blah. That's racist.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is racist.
Yeah.
Forget white fragility. Well, but then if you say how white people, the implication is all white people are this, whatever this is. That is racist. So they hold these two ideas that are completely at odds with each other, and they hold it because that allows you to believe anything basically at any given time.
This is the key.
Yeah.
You know, so many words just have entered our language because of this book.
Mm-hmm.
Words like doublethink or newspeak, or Big Brother is one. And newspeak is the one I want to focus on, because newspeak is political correctness.
Yeah.
And the theory of newspeak is that the party, Big Brother, is going to get rid of all the old language that people have used for centuries and centuries.
Who the fuck is the party? The Big Brother, like, these people have been... Yeah, of course, Del Angelo's not that far left. Not at all. Not even left. Yeah, like, I keep saying this in the UK about how the left wing have not been in government since the 70s. In America, what? Before Bush, before like Obama, you had what? Bush, then Clinton. Like, where exactly is this left-wing control over the state that these people are talking about? These people are fucking... This is what... Like, the 1984 thing is the kind of thing that you do. The more you give people, the more they want. You know, that's why the kind of thing that this 1984 thing, it just comes up from people who are winning and are just... It's not enough for them. These people are fucking babies.
And replace it with this new ideological, party-approved clean language, which sounds robotic, it sounds so crazy. Instead of saying something is bad, you'll say it's ungood or double plus ungood.
Right.
Who the fuck says ungood?
Right.
But so what does that sound like right now? It sounds like he, him, they, her, all of these things. So again, it's like, wow, how did he do this in 1948? I'm not exactly sure. I think there's some relation to, it's after World War II, and there's obviously some parallels to the way the Nazis use language and things like that. But it's still.
Wait, does Dave Rubin not know what the book is referring to? Does he not know what he's linking 1984 to? Like, it's a prediction about the Soviet Union that turned out to be a bit inaccurate. That's what it. Why does he keep coming back to that? That's a really good opportunity for him. That's a good opportunity for him to say that the left are bringing Soviet-style communism in. Newspeak is gendered pronouns. Yeah, okay.
Pretty remarkable.
And I guess the premise, as you touched on, is that if I change my words, if I change the language, I will change reality. This ties into the insistence of the government. You have to believe that 2 + 2 = 5, because if we all really believe that, then that will be true. And it seems to be the same thing when you call a he, when you call him her, you have really substantively changed who he is.
Yeah, well, this...
Is that guy saying that trans women are not women? I mean, it's pretty good. I have no idea who that other guy is, but that sounds very, yeah. I wonder if, I don't actually know if Dave Rubin's ever brought that up. I wonder what he's going to say to that.
So what's interesting about this is, I think when most people, maybe not my conservative friends, but when most people think of like the totalitarian, authoritarian state coming, they always think it's going to be a far right state. Like the idea in 1984 is that the Ministry of Truth, like the whole apparatus, is somehow thought of as far right, I think, is the idea.
He doesn't know what the book's about. He doesn't know that it's a reference to the Soviet Union. Does he? Do you know the government in 1984? What the fuck is the government called? They're called INGSOC, right? Not that. INGSOC. English Socialism. That's the party that runs the government. And he's saying that that the intention is what? That to be a right-wing thing? What a fucking he could have read the little thinker and got that bit, right? Fuck.
If you like something like V for Vendetta, it's the idea is that it's this far right political machine that's silencing people and everything else. And yet look what's happening in reality now. In reality now, it's this far left thing that's seemingly bubbling up from the bottom.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting flip on this. So it's one of those things where it's like there's so much truth, and yet there's still these like offshoots where you can kind of go, oh, it's not exactly right, but it's like, it's pretty much there.
Well, even slightly beyond 1984, but still on the themes and still on George Orwell. George Orwell wrote a very famous essay called Politics in the English Language. And in it, he says that the word fascism no longer has any meaning. All fascism means is something I don't like. And when you look around today, that word, probably more than any other word, has been abused beyond having any meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the fucking conservatives who keep on calling people who are protesting to stop police brutality are fascists.
Well, I think one of the interesting things is the way that we're all guilty of it at times, the way we all can use these words to mean more than they're supposed to mean, or we widen them. But look, this is something we've talked about forever. You call everybody a Nazi, congratulations, now nobody's a Nazi. You call everybody a fascist, and then when the real fascists come, nobody is going to be listening or paying attention. You know, it's the boy who cried wolf in essence. So I think there's just sort of this endless destruction of everything that's true. I guess that's really what the book is about in many ways, more than anything else.
Yes.
That there is truth, there actually is truth, and there actually is history, and there actually is...
Yeah, there's a theme here, isn't there? Did Dennis Prager actually organize this, or the other guy? The creepy fucking book review uncle. Are they doing doublespeak deliberately? Is this the only single clever thing that PragerU has ever done?
Everything that's true. I guess that's really what the book is about in many ways, more than anything else.
Yes.
That there is truth, there actually is truth, and there actually is history, and there actually is time and a chronology that shows us what is real. But if you can destroy that, if you can destroy that fabric, you can get people to say 2 + 2 is 5, and it'll make sense.
So I'm obviously frustrated as I read this, because I look around and I say, oh my gosh, it's really happening. There's this one bit of the story that a lot of people don't talk about.
I love it that federal agents, the police are putting out more tear gas than I've ever seen anywhere. And these guys are saying that 1984, relating 1984 to gendered pronouns and people calling people fascists. Right-leaning people getting called fascists. That's amazing. That's fucking brilliant.
But
these guys are such good propagandists. Like, there is a skill behind this. I'm going to go into that maybe after this.
There's this recurring old nursery rhyme that Winston and Julia keep going back to, and the line goes, "Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's." And they seem to get this real joy, this real pleasure out of going back to just some nursery rhyme. It certainly doesn't sound like anything that now the party-controlled language talks about.
Did you see Rubin's face as he was reciting that poem? And he got a bit confused and didn't know what to make of it.
Rhyme. It certainly doesn't sound like anything that now the oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's.
Look, he's losing
and they seem to get this real joy, this real pleasure out of going back to just some nursery rhyme. It certainly doesn't sound like anything that now the party-controlled language talks about anymore. So there's this other part where Winston is getting down and dirty with Julia, right? She tells him that she's been with lots of men before him. And instead of being repulsed by that, Winston gets excited and he says, anything that hinted at corruption always filled him with a wild hope.
Mm-hmm.
In this clinical, ideological society, how is it that actually a little bit of corruption fills you with hope?
Well, because humans are supposed to use their imagination. We're supposed to hope. We're supposed to dream. We're supposed to have passion. We're supposed to have sex. We're supposed to live, right? Like, we're supposed to do all of those things.
Mistakes.
You're supposed to make mistakes. Right. You're supposed to do things so that you can either realize they're good things to do that fulfill you, or maybe they don't, or they do in the short term, and then you have to reevaluate and all those things. But in a super sterilized world, when you can never break that conformity, then the tiniest hint, oh, I'm sleeping with somebody who's really been around the block, is suddenly really exciting. And by the way, we see many versions of that right now with political correctness, which is sort of like, if you keep everybody completely politically correct all the time, suddenly we'll all start wanting to be not politically correct. Now, I think that's good right now, right? We need more people to break out of it. But
remember when conservatives used to have this kind of veneer of being well-mannered and decent and staying within the line? I really wish they would bring that back, because right now, the kind of shit that was usually attributed to left-wingers in the 60s and 70s is the kind of the vulgarity, the way that people like Mary Winehouse and all that would have a go at progressive people for being vulgar, for stepping out of line, and for being kind of hurtful and inconsiderate of people around them. And these people, these fucking babies, wanting to be politically incorrect just because other people would rather they weren't. Does Dave Rubin just like really want to say the N-word all the time? Just because you can't say it? I'll bet he does, because that's what you can't say, right? Is it bubbling inside his little brain right now?
You know, the idea of political correctness generally comes, I think, like most things, it's the road to hell is paved with good intentions. When people say they want to be politically correct, they want to make sure that people aren't offended. Now, you do that too long, and what are you left with? You're left with just nothing. You're left with an inability to do anything. So when we watch people cancel each other on Twitter and we watch mobs and everything go after everybody, in a way, they're trying to pretend they're pious. I'm so great. Right. And if anyone else steps out of line and says something that I don't like, I don't believe, I'll destroy them because I'm so much better.
Because I'm so much better, and because human nature can be perfected. Right? I mean, that's
of course it can be. Of course.
We're on the path there.
If only we had the right language and the erasure of time and the erasure of statues and everything else. A little more power is always good.
This is why when I think of Newspeak, when I think of Winston talking about the corruption,
they say a little more power is always good. Yeah, if only the left had any power anywhere. I agree with that. That would be nice. Rustic Ghost with $5. Damn, sounds like Dave Rubin is a gender abolitionist based. Dave Rubin would absolutely turn into a gender abolitionist if he thought it could get him a bit more money, a bit more fame. I'll bet you, very tragically, when Michael Brooks passed away, when everyone was out there giving their sort of takes on, their very correct takes on just how good he was and how unique he was, Dave Rubin definitely saw that and thought about dying, because maybe that would get the people on his side who were involved in his community to start respecting him, for people to stop saying that he's a sinner. Dave Rubin sat there and thought, I wonder if I die. Maybe Eric Trump will stop calling me a faggot.
Corruption. It reminds me that political correctness, which is our own version of newspeak, it doesn't just divide along ideological lines perfectly, or rather, should I say, partisan lines. It's not like it's only Democrats and no Republicans.
Absolutely.
And actually, what a lot of surveys show is that a big dividing line is wealth, how much money you make. People who would be considered by the lights of our society elites tend to be much more okay with political correctness than people who are at the lower rung.
What's the difference between an old crazy woman and an old eccentric woman? It's money, right?
Oh, elites are okay with political. Is that the all left-wingers are rich meme that they say as they are funded by a billionaire propagandist regime? Let's have a look. Let's what is that? What did they say? What was the thing? No, not Republicans. There. Support for capitalism increases with income. I mean, that's how long it takes. People that is a huge thing in Britain as well, for people to say that. Like, it's so obvious, but not to these fucking people. But yeah, that's a massive meme, and especially what they do with wait, it's doublethink, isn't it? It's literally doublethink. So what they do with class in the UK is they will call you working class or elite based on the way you are culturally, or whether you're urban or rural, usually. So it's very typical for someone to get interviewed as a what, the link, Alex? Do you want the link of the chart that I just looked at? Yeah, I'll put that in. There you go. Yeah, they'll treat the way you are, but with your class based on more on your views and your demeanor than they will by what your actual status is. So if you are, I don't know, like someone from the country who owns 2 houses but is bald and has reactionary views on immigrants, then newspapers will interview you as a working class person. They've done that. And if you're, I don't know, someone who is black and you work in Starbucks and you're a fan of Billie Eilish, but you live in like fucking Tottenham, then you're an elite. That's something that I think maybe the left needs to find a way to work around. The left needs to get, obviously we can't redefine the terms because they've got the media, but I think maybe the left could do with being a bit better at speaking to and relating to the people who fit that working class aesthetic a bit better. I don't know. Because it's not quite edgy. It's not quite just being edgy. There's something else to it. In Scotland, there's a thing when you're talking to a person with a regional accent, is that if you're someone like me who was raised on American TV, then even though despite being working class, the only way I'll kind of be accepted as working class by them is if I change my accent, is if I start speaking with a more Scottish regional accent. But yeah, that is a nice bit of double think there, Dave Rubin. Well done.
If you're an old woman with no money and you're babbling on, you're the crazy cat lady. And if you're an old woman who's rich, she's eccentric.
What a character.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that really is it.
This is one of the famous lines that Winston writes in his diary. He says, "If there is hope, it lies in the proles." The proles, like the proletarians or the lower class of people, they don't really follow all these rules. They're kind of ignored by the party.
There's another word for that.
What's that?
The deplorables.
The deplorables, the irredeemables.
Yeah, the irredeemables. That's exactly what it means. It means that if there's any hope, it's that the people,
or the working class, the people, the 28 million people who are facing risk of eviction and are allowed to be facing eviction by the Republicans,
who the system constantly throws out, constantly mocks, constantly tries to destroy. They're the only ones who will be able to say something true.
Yeah.
Even right now, just listening to what goes on in the political ether, it's like I hear a lot of people being like, I'd love to pull a John Galt one day, and just disappear altogether.
Come from Ayn Rand, another great book to read these days.
I assume you've done Atlas Shrugged.
Not yet.
You haven't done it yet? Okay.
But we have to do it.
Yeah, but that people will just self-select out, and then who will be left? The only people who will have a flicker of anything interesting to say will be the deplorables.
Right.
Yeah.
This deplorable issue, I think, comes up. I think there is a sense that the elites are just not even aware. The party is not even aware of the seeds of its own destruction. But there is a little bit of a performance.
Kind of feels like now, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
But the performance is what worries me even most. You mentioned Twitter.
Yeah.
On Twitter, it seems like every day now, some random person is plucked out of obscurity. We are all whipped up into a frenzy to hate this person.
They did something in Central Park that
I didn't like that she yelled at a guy on whatever.
Yeah.
And now this person is the villain of the country.
Yes.
And then that's gone, goes down the memory hole. Remember, another term that comes from 1984 is completely erased and forgotten about. There is a category in 1984 called...
I don't know what I think of that. When someone gets caught doing some reactionary shit on Twitter and is seen by millions and millions and millions of people. And I mean, the reason that these people think, I just changed my mind on it completely as I was saying that. The reason that these people like Dave think that's so important and amplified and that it is like that kind of, he's going to call that a 2-minute hate, like the Karen who tried to strangle her dog just so she could call the cops on a black man. They think that because they're on Twitter all the time. That's why. These are people who are addicted to Twitter, who are addicted to getting affirmation, who are desperate for approval still to this point. And that's why they're viewing the world in this way. If Twitter was real life, these people would maybe be onto something. Maybe we do focus too much on just one kind of the epitome of what we don't like, but that's just Twitter. It's a website.
2 minutes hate. Every day. All the people...
Nailed it. 2-minute hate. Who would have guessed?
People in the party are whipped up to hate the villain, the rebel, the Goldstein. Goldstein is the man. They put him on the TV screen. You gotta just hate this guy. 2 minutes, then it's over, then you move on.
Yeah, sort of feels like The Purge, right? The movie The Purge. I mean, the idea is you get 1 day a year to do all the horrible stuff. That's what the movie The Purge is about. And yes, this is what we do. We find these people who are nobodies that have no effect over your life that you've never heard of. They did something you don't like. Destroy them. And really it's never about them, right? It's always about the signal that sends across the world, which is you don't want to be that guy. Right. You don't want to be that guy. But wait, there's one other thing I want to touch on Winston, which is as he's working at the Ministry of Truth and as he's obscuring reality and changing words and all of this stuff, he's miserable.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually really interesting because I think if we look at the people who are the most politically correct now, they are miserable because that is not, it's anti-human in many
Does this having to call trans women by their preferred pronouns or NB people by their preferred pronouns, does that make Dave Rubin sad? Is Dave Rubin sad that he can't say the N-word? Is it bubbling, simmering level inside his brain all the time? He goes to sleep with a fucking muzzle in case he says the N-word in his sleep. Poor Dave Rubin.
Anyways, to be so against thought, to be so against someone joking, even if that joke crosses whatever your subjective line is, to be so against that is actually the reverse of what being a human is, which is about using your mind. So I think it's just sort of interesting that the people that were the ones putting this stuff into the world were miserable
are the
while they
most
were
miserable.
doing it. Yeah.
And Winston, he needs to take shots of this gross gin just to get through the day. But then when he's got this love affair, this little secret hideout with Julia, all of a sudden he doesn't need the gin. He doesn't need the substances.
And by the way, you know, they've done a couple articles I've seen about Facebook censors that all become alcoholics and miserable and suicidal. I'm not kidding. Because they're...
Yeah, Facebook censors. The people who are outsourced by Facebook, usually from poorer countries, paid very, very little to look through all the stuff on Facebook that's been flagged as inappropriate, to look through all the death videos and the Christchurch shootings and all the maimings and all that. They're given, as far as I remember, they're given 5 minutes of every day to sit on the stairwell and cry. That's part of their rights as workers as the censors of Facebook. They have to be supervised while they're crying. Yeah, that's if anyone ever asks you, I know people like to say that capitalism, who is Mark Zuckerberg ever exploited? I think that's a Sargon line. There's your answer. The censors.
They're literally doing the exact same thing Winston is doing. They're looking out on Facebook and they're going, what can we get rid of? What word is okay? What word is not okay? Do I kind of like this guy? Then I can let that one slide.
Does Dave Rubin think that the people who are censors on Facebook are upset because they have to filter N-words? Because they get flagged with an N-word and they're like, oh, I really wish I could let that stay. That's a really good one. That's a really good, well capitalized N-word. I want to keep that one. But then the PC police of Facebook forces them to remove it. That's why Dave Rubin empathizes, not because they're working class, not because they are brutally exploited to prop up insane fucking billionaire who sells data for election purposes. No. No, Dave Rubin empathizes with censors because they have to delete N-words.
I don't like this guy, so we got to take care of that. And they become miserable because of it.
But the most depressing part of this book, I thought we'd already gotten there.
So it was funny because when I was rereading it, I was like, there has to be something at the end that will kind of like want us to continue, right? Especially people like us that put our thoughts out there, right? And it doesn't really give you anything.
The most depressing part of this book for me is that there's this rebellion, that this revolution, the 2 minutes of hate, Goldstein, right? Goldstein has a secret book, and the book is going to tell you all about that party, and it's going to... So Winston meets these other people in the inner party. They give him the secret book. He reads the secret book, and it turns out it's a setup. Or if it's not a setup, it's still a setup.
Yeah.
Because he's given the book by a member of the inner party that in this system, it even has its own opposition within it. There is no escape.
Right.
Even that opposition might be a false hope or a safety valve on the utter oppression. What are we supposed to do with that?
Well, I think this is what people would say is sort of like our political system now, is like this sort of fake.
They could have such an easy time linking this all to Russia bad. But they're trying to relate it to political correctness instead. I guess the Russia bad thing is it's 10 minutes left, Jeremy. So yes, that's fucking amazing. Because controlled opposition is a very contemporary Russian thing. Oppositional parties are controlled by people who work within the Kremlin. God, I could Red Scare better than these two are right now. That's very sad.
Fake duopoly.
Yes.
Right? It's like this fake, we've got, the Democrats or the liberals and the Republicans, the conservatives, whatever. And it's like, it seemingly is that those are the only choices. And yes, as long as the system only allows those choices, well, then those are the only choices.
Yeah, one reason for that, at least until very recently, was that both parties, they still are, were equally funded by Wall Street. That's why the bailout happened in 2008, and that's why the tax programs are always the way they are. They could bring that up as well, because there's a lot of right-wing populism involved in that. They could easily get the anti-Semites that follow PragerU on board if they did that. These guys are doing a really, I take it back actually. The first half of this was really good propaganda when they were calling political correctness doublethink whilst engaging in doublethink. But this bit now, where they have all these perfect opportunities to go Russia bad, communism bad, they're missing every mark. Miserable. I'm gonna apply to PragerU. I'm gonna send this video in an email to them.
But are those really the only choices? You got to believe this or you got to believe this. I mean, no one really lives their life like that. But unfortunately, the whole system, and in this case, everything that he was led to believe, leaves you with that. And that uncomfortability is even worse.
This is
knowing about it, right? Like, it's easier to just be a guy on one side or the other side, whatever it is, and then just run with it. But to know it and then be like,
what do I do now? Because you look and it seems like no matter who wins the election, no matter which party wins, certain things just keep on happening. We lose more and more of our freedoms. We rack up more and more of our debt. The culture keeps going more and more in one direction. It doesn't seem to matter who wins.
I dare make a pro-Trump comment. I don't know if I'm allowed.
We'll certainly be censored by the Ministry of Truth on the internet.
Somebody's not going to be happy about this. But in many ways, when
someone's going to get surprised that Dave Rubin is going to say something nice about Trump.
I was rereading it. I kept thinking, man, what they needed was a Trump.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because what was Trump, or what is Trump? He just sort of broke through all of this. If you're talking about how do you break the duopoly, how do you break the false choices, how do you break political correctness, all of these things, who has been the greatest breaker of those things? It's been Trump. So it's like, in a weird way, if the book had ended and there suddenly was this person who was just willing to do it for some very bizarre reason, and perhaps he was orange and had weird hair, like, then I guess you see some hope, but you don't get the orange.
I hate to be more pessimistic than you, because I see the same sort of thing you do.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why people in both parties don't like Donald Trump is because he broke the rules. He he messed up the system a little. Though I do think it sort of remains to be seen if that will have a lasting effect, or if the culture and the politics keeps careening in this same direction.
Yeah.
That is why Trump was appealing. He appeared as an insurgent. Did you notice when he was running for the Republican Party, when he was fighting against them, he didn't speak like an ultra-right immigrant bashing, because all the Republicans do that. They all compete. If that was, if it was really just a far-right thing, that was fucking, who is it? Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz was much more terrifying sounding when it came to racism and militarism and all that than Trump was. Trump spoke a bit more like, he spoke like a left-winger to the Republicans. He spoke about how corrupt they were, how they only cared about money, and how all the leaders were supposedly against each other, but evenly stacked by the same donors, including himself. Yeah, which of course makes him not quite the insurgent that they're painting him out to be, but he pretended to be one. He did a very good job at convincing these two guys that he was.
The question I want to leave you on is, how do you think he did it? What was it that he saw in the 1940s that could predict our present moment?
Yeah, so I thought
Soviet Union, here, come on, red bad, commies bad. This is his chance. What was it he saw in the 1940s in a book where the leading party is called English Socialism? Come on, I'm ready for it. He's gonna say it. He's gonna do it. It's gonna have taken him it took him 24 minutes.
A lot about that because I had a feeling you might come at me with a question like that. And as I sort of referenced earlier, so he wrote it in the late 40s. So you're coming off of World War II. So I don't know specifically, and I'm sure people have thought about this a lot. And I was really trying to think through.
No, he doesn't. Fuck, he doesn't.
Think maybe more than anything else, what makes good literature or what makes a good movie or any piece of art that's true is that it is able to capture something that is timeless. And the struggle constantly, this is why the struggle right now, even though we think of it as Democrat versus Republican or Trump versus...
He didn't answer the question, did he? Did he say no one knows? Did he say he doesn't know?
And I was really trying to think through, I think maybe more than anything else, what makes good literature or what makes it
predict our present moment.
Yeah, so I thought a lot about that because I had a feeling you might come at me with a question like that. And as I sort of referenced earlier, so he wrote it in the late 40s. So you're coming off of World War II. So I don't know specifically, and I'm sure people have thought about this a lot. And I was really trying to think through, I think maybe more than anything else, what makes good literature or what makes a good movie or any piece of art that's true is that it is able to capture something.
Yeah, he dodged the question. Dave Rubin reread 1984, where Ingsoc, English Socialism, 1940s, written by a guy who wrote Animal Farm. Does he know that Animal Farm is about the Soviet Union? Dave Rubin thinks Animal Farm is just a nice story about animals.
That is timeless. And the struggle constantly, this is why the struggle right now, even though we think of it as Democrat versus Republican or Trump versus Biden or whatever it is, it's like all it really is always is you versus the system. It's the individual versus the system. And sometimes the system is better, meaning it's more open to freedom and more open to individuals, and sometimes it's not. And I think that is what was carried through from 1948, 49 into 2020. And it feels right now that the system is very against the individual, and
surely the guy who hosted this is going to help him out with that answer.
I think that might be.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have a better answer on that?
I don't know if I have a better answer. I think your point is right that George Orwell.
He doesn't have a better answer than no answer. There's I think he organized this. He's got little post-its in his book. Fuck, man. Why are they not doing it?
Is this individualist, and he's kind of looking out at the system. Though I, again, might have a more pessimistic view on your point about literature. It would seem to me we can see communism fails because it just totally misunderstands human nature. The way communism
I think in a roundabout way
ends up is so different from the theory of communism. They're so disconnected that it can't work. And the same thing is true of fascism. I think the question we're maybe trying to deal with now is that true of liberalism too? We've got these three great ideologies of modernity: fascism, communism, and liberalism. We thought that liberalism was the last one standing, it's the end of history. That's what we were told, at least by the people at the end of the Cold War. Well, maybe history takes a little bit longer to resolve. And as
this is what you're bringing to me at the end? You're handing me the "Is liberalism dead" at the end of this thing? This is my life's work.
I know, this is the real thing. I didn't. You thought that
this was an incredible sham to get me here.
You thought 1984 was depressing at the end. Yeah. This is the most depressing part.
But I am glad you brought that up though, because that is the part of me that is fearful of what is happening right now is that the experiment of liberalism and the experiment of free speech and enlightenment and all of those things, that it really does feel like it's getting to its end right now. That the end of it is that this more liberal, supposedly this ultra lefty progressive thing will come in through the soft spot of liberalism, the openness of liberalism, and dismantle every statue, destroy every university, crush every newspaper. I mean, everything.
All the great achievements of liberalism.
And that's exactly what this book is about.
Yeah.
So how he saw it, I guess, yes, it is a connection between 10 years before the Nazis were literally burning books. What are we doing right now? Yeah. We're not burning books yet, although NPR did put out that thing about how you have to decolonize your bookshelf, which
right.
in essence is a modern book
Burn
burning.
the books,
They're not going to write, oh, burn all your books, but they will say, get rid of bad books.
Yeah.
1984.
Right. This is it.
Who was the conservative MP who had a bunch of weird books on his Michael Gove? I'm just gonna get. I mean, I'm not going to say get rid of them, but what did he have there? He had the bell curve, obviously, raised in IQ, Atlas Shrugged. He had. There's one in particular here that's really, really bad. David Irving, the Holocaust denier, who was called a Holocaust denier by another writer, and he tried to sue her for defamation. And in court, they actually ran through his book to see how Holocaust denial-ish it was, and it just turned out that they went into what he was doing. Like, I actually read a bit of the transcripts from the court that they were looking at this. They were looking at this book of his and his assertions about the Holocaust, seeing where he was getting his claims from. One thing that he did was he would make a little claim about I don't know, like the wooden doors or something, and he would cite a 100-page document, and then they would read the 100-page document in court, and there was nothing of it that he had mentioned. So he made up a quote or a fact or a figure, and then just attached it to this paper that had nothing to do with the thing he was saying. He was asked about like the width of the holes that the bodies were thrown into, and he said, "How do you know how wide the holes were?" And he says, and he started talking about holes that he had dug in his garden. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't think you should get in trouble for reading that stuff. But if you're an MP in charge of government and you've been reading that alongside a few other very suggestible, I think people should definitely be allowed to question you on that, on what you're actually talking about, on what your actual intents are for society. But no, I'm actually with Dave. I think people should be allowed to read what they want. Ironically, Michael Gove, who owns these books, doesn't believe that. He was in charge of Prevent Strategy for a while. He wrote books in favor of Prevent Strategy where Muslim students would read about the Taliban or something like that for academic purposes, and then they would have fucking agents at their house arresting them in the middle of the night, taking them to unknown locations and holding them with under no charges for long periods of time. So
I wish that we could have a greater
chilling,
hope here,
man.
but we can't. It is a little chilling.
So what is the hope? What really is the hope? Because as I was reading the end, I kept thinking maybe I'm forgetting that there is a glimmer of hope at the end.
You know what? Here is my hope, I suppose, at the end, which is a little bit of a plug for this show as well. You cannot remain a slave if you are literate and you read. You can't do it. This is why all the totalitarian regimes in history have tried to burn all of the books, have tried to stop people from reading, have tried to have anti-literacy laws. And what George Orwell is describing here, the reason it resonates with, not just now, perhaps at a...
I'll tell you a really, really funny story about conservatives and reading. Literacy was kind of brought to the British working class in the Industrial Revolution by Christian missionaries. They were actually the ones who got people reading before the schools did. The schools, some of the teachers in early Industrial Revolution Britain were classes who were taught by teachers who couldn't write their own names. They were not very good, but conservatives did because they wanted people to read the Bible. They saw that the working class of the time were pretty, I don't know, decadent. They were going to gin shops and getting pissed all the time and pretty aimless. They didn't have time for church. So they tried to get them to help people who were homeless or poor people or people who had their weekends off to read. One particular conservative called Hannah Moore was a bit more authoritative. And what she did was she tried to get her students or people that she brought in, she tried to teach kids how to, adults as well, she tried to teach them how to read without teaching them how to write. Her strategy was to teach people to read without teaching them to write, because she thought if they read, they would just read the conservative and religious text she gave them, but they wouldn't write any ideas of their own. She explicitly said that. She just didn't realize that once you've taught someone how to read, they will learn to write. So that's probably one of my favorite stories of conservative stupidity. But there you go.
Particularly Orwellian moment, but it has resonated for so many years, is because he is describing something that we know is real, something that we experience to varying degrees throughout our entire relationship to politics. And as they burn the books, as they topple the statues, as they erase the history, as they memory hole everything that we cherish, that we thought we could rely on, there is still a little bit of hope, I think, for those of us who are willing to crack the spine of a book or two and see the vast difference between reality and all the propaganda that the system is spewing at us.
Knowles, I want to let you...
Yeah, like these guys who read 1984, who have both apparently read 1984 and put Post-its in it, advertised the Spark Notes so you can at least look smart in front of your friends, so you can pretend to have read it, not knowing that he was relating Ingsoc to the Soviet Union.
You end the show with that because it was a perfect, beautiful ending, but I have like 10 things I want to say about
Well, lay it on me. Let's do it. This is the time to do it.
This idea of the memory hole, I wanted to mention it before, but don't you feel like that's something we're also going through right now, that we forget, wait a minute, 2 years ago, the biggest thing was Michael Cohen testimony is going to take down Donald Trump, or Russian this, or
Stormy
Ukraine
Daniels,
that, or remember,
Ukraine.
A little before your time, Y2K was going to kill all of us. That these, what's going to kill us now? 5G is going to kill us, and net neutrality was supposed to kill us, and we killed, what's his name, in Iran? We killed
Soleimani, World War III.
And that was going to start World War III. But they all get memory holes. We suddenly were outraged for this period of time. And also even something more perverse, like they all happen in these very short bursts also. And then once that period of time is over, you never do it again. So remember Me Too, it burned hot for like 3 weeks. And then the second we like close the book on that, we move on. It's not as if those things still aren't happening or something else. But that, and then the other thing was that the phrase Orwellian, it's not just the other phrases, but his name actually became a phrase. That tells you something really good happened.
It tells you he wrote a good book.
Yeah, that's a good book.
In the spirit of telling people to go out and read books.
Yes.
In the spirit of not burning books.
Yeah.
We should tell them to read your book. Don't burn this book.
I'd like to believe, I would like to believe that my book is in many ways the last, I mean, I don't want to be so hoity-toity, but
it's better than George Orwell. Yeah, it's better than 1984.
It is Rubenesque.
It is Rubenesque. Rubinellian.
It's
Rubinian.
Rubenesque. They would describe a large woman.
Dave Rubin wants that to happen. He's the kind of guy that would go into school and try and invent a catchphrase. Rubinian.
It's Rubenesque. But it is, in many ways, everything that I wrote about in that book is fighting for the same things that Winston ended up sort of giving away at the end. So read 1984. Forget Don't Burn This Book. It's a good book too, but read 1984.
It's a good sequel.
It's a pretty good sequel.
It's a good sequel. This one first.
If I end up in a contraption with rats on me, I'm putting you. It was Knowles, guys.
I'm going to be on the inner party. I'm going to be the one who ratted you out. You kidding me? Dave, thank you so much. We can talk about this.
It was my pleasure.
True. Don't read Dave's book. Don't read 1984 either. It's kind of shit. Okay. That was fucking, I don't know. I don't know if PragerU book reviews are really going to be my thing, but I probably would like to do one with a propagandist that's a little bit less fucking dense than Dave Rubin. Do they do that often? Does PragerU often do book reviews? We'll find out. How is everyone doing? 109 people watching. You've stayed for this long. Yeah, my Windows Critical Hippo are behind my computer screen. So it's there. That's my window. Yeah, that was a really fucking dumb video. Holy shit. I think the only thing that made that worth it was the fact that they had 30 minutes, plus the fact that they'd both read the same book to have a chance to go communism bad, and they didn't. They missed it. They missed the most obvious thing about the book because they wanted to talk about political correctness. Very, very ungood, unsmart. Yes, ungood. I think I still have a bit that I wanted to do on housing. I have not expected. How long have I been streaming for? 2.5 hours? Fucking hell. What an idiot. How do people do this? It's ridiculous. So what I think I'm going to do is... Yeah, I'm going to go to the bathroom again. Again, I drink too much water. But yes, I'm going to do a little bit on housing just because it's quite short. And yeah, I think there's something valuable in there. Definitely with all these fucking evictions. And I will wash my hands because we get free water in Scotland. Amazing. My brothers and sisters, let's do one more of these fucking things. So, housing. It kind of seems like there's a housing crisis happening all the time. You notice? 2008, when I just left school, there was the biggest housing crisis. The housing market, which was supposedly impervious to any shocks, anything. I did. My hands smell like lemons. Collapsed. No fucking politician, anyone in the mainstream economists saw it coming. Housing has been very expensive ever since. It's always been a very unnecessary burden placed on us. Limits our consumption power, keeps you up at night. It's stressful. It's very, very, very difficult to buy a house. It used to be, what, 4-year mortgage, 0 interest? Those are the kind of, when you get those like boomer types who tell us how good we have it, you know, that's them, and a 4-year mortgage with 0 interest on it. And just recently, because of the COVID crisis, a lot of people are unemployed or earning less. Landlords don't give a fuck about that. They are potentially going to evict up to, what, 22 to 28 million people. There's quite a lot of news sources have covered that already. I'm not going to go into that specifically, but why is there always a housing crisis? That's kind of what I want to speak about. Why is housing a fundamental human right. Most people would say it's a human right that we can't seem to have, or that we have to pay an incredibly high premium for. A really good way you can get into this question on housing is from Karl Marx. There's a really good thing that summed it up for me from reading that fucking Capital. I'm not one of those people who says you should read theory. You don't need to. People can explain this a lot better than I can who haven't read theory. But if there's anyone in here who's ever wanted to read something like that, but maybe just doesn't know where to start because it's a very dense thing with very difficult language and very long sentences, and yeah, it's not very easy to grasp. Especially the first time I read it, I had no idea. Yeah, that's volume 1 out of 3, Critical Hippo. Yeah. What translation? The one that's in your language, comrade. I think I'm probably going to show you how you can read Capital, or a good way that I was told. I read it once when I was about 18, didn't understand any of it, really. Read it a second time a couple of years later with a bit more guidance from university people and all that, and after knowing a bit of the philosophy background, and it started to make a lot more sense. The first part of it made it very, very easy to understand housing. So, streamers never do this, so I'm breaking new ground here. I'm going to read the first page of Capital to you guys, and I'm going to tell you why it gives you the most perfect way to understand housing. So, first chapter is on the commodity. That's where he starts. He doesn't start with supply and demand or the market or anything. He starts with the one product. The wealth of societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails appears as an immense collection of commodities. The individual commodity appears as its elementary form. Our investigation therefore begins with the analysis of the commodity. The author's Karl Marx, Felix, stop trolling. The commodity is, first of all, an external object, a thing which through its qualities satisfies human needs of whatever kind. The nature of these needs, wherever they rise, for example, from the stomach or the imagination, makes no difference. So, very unbiased looking at commodities there. He doesn't care whether you're buying something you need or not. It's just commodities. Nor does it matter here how the thing satisfies man's need, it's always man's, whether directly as a means of subsistence, i.e. as an object of consumption, or indirectly as a means of production. Every useful thing, for example, iron, paper, etc., may be looked at from 2 points of view of quality and quantity. Every useful thing is as a whole composed in many properties. It can therefore be useful in various ways. The discovery of these ways, and hence of the manifold uses of things, is the work of history. Again, he doesn't care what commodities we're talking about, just that they're there. He repeats himself a lot. So this is the invention of socially recognized standards of measurement for the quantities of these useful objects. The diversity of the 100 pounds worth of lead or iron is as great a value as 100 pounds worth of silver and gold. As use values, commodities differ above all in quality, while as exchange values, they can only differ in quantity, and therefore do not contain an atom of use value. So, that there, first page. I'm going to go into Paint, which I'm very bad at using. Why is it so fucking small? Okay. We're going to go into Paint. I'm going to show you my Paint screen. There we go. So this is what you would call, have you ever heard someone talk about dialectics? German philosophy? It's the idea of looking at two sides of the same thing. So if I put in commodity, this is actually how you read the whole book. The whole book kind of goes like this in a big linkage. So you've got your commodity. And what he said at the end there was it's broken up into two aspects, which are, the first one is the use value. The second one is exchange value. So essentially, what he's talking about here is that use value is the function of a commodity. every commodity. Oh, of course I can move the canvas so chat isn't covering it. Genius. Is that better? So, yeah, my art. Thanks for calling it that. So, the commodity is split up into the use value and exchange value. Those are the two kind of components that go against each other to make a commodity. A commodity can't really be an exchange value without being a use value. This is the idea that he's talking about use value just as in whether that need is perceived or if it's real. So an iPhone is a use value just as much as bread is. Where they differ is an exchange value, which is price. Now, when I'm talking about housing, this is how you simplify the problem with housing. Is certain commodities are only use values, like air, oxygen. In some countries, say like in Scotland, water is a use value. You don't have to pay for water from the taps. That's perfectly clean and it's available to anyone. Exchange value is kind of an optional thing that happens to use values. Now, what I think happens with housing, at least in the past, is societies would effectively handle housing as a collective. That was like the first ever houses that were built was if you needed shelter, the community would get together, they'd build houses, they'd pile the bricks one on top of the other, and everyone would have a house. They were strictly use values. Under capitalism, housing has been ever more and more converted into exchange value. Social housing used to be a very, very big thing in America and in the UK. I think they used to build up to 1/3 houses every year. Now it's less than 100,000 with a lower population. Clara, it is dialectics in Marx's terms. It's not Hegelian dialectics. It's, according to Marx, this is how he utilized it. Two sides of the same thing. Take it up with the dead man. So, if we look at housing in that way, as an exchange value, what are the consequences of that? Well, what we end up getting is a housing market, something that is designed not to fulfill the needs, for the use value needs of people, but something that is there to satisfy market needs, to satisfy the needs to profit of the people who own them. So you already run into a problem there, because what if it isn't, from an exchange value perspective, functional to treat housing as a use value, as a human right? What if it's more beneficial to have your tenants interchangeable, to have your quality of housing low so that you don't have to spend as much money, so that the tenants don't have to live in a good quality of housing? What if these are contradictory, which they are? That's the point of the dialectic here, is that the exchange value and the use value of housing come into conflict. A very good example of this is how we have more homeless people in the United States than there are empty houses. If you've ever been to New York and walked around the streets there, if you look up at one of those skyscrapers, residential skyscrapers, and ask yourself how many people have left their lights on after 8 o'clock, most of them haven't. They're empty. They're not empty because the landlord is losing out, though. They're empty because those houses are not used as use values. They're used to make money. Oh yeah, more houses than homeless people, sorry. Wait, yeah, that is right. Fucking hell. It's getting late. London is full of empty houses as well, of course, Joe, Mama. So this is a direct tension, and that's a really good way to think about it, because there are lots and lots of goods that we don't think about in that sense because they're human rights. At least in the UK, until probably not for long, we have healthcare, which is treated as a use value. We have, to an extent, in Scotland, you get free prescriptions. That's a use value as well. There are quite a lot of things that don't really work in a very profitable way, but work in a very good human need way. This is probably why we have these kind of issues. Now, Sad Boy Electron has rent control. Problem with that is you get issues like you're getting currently. I know rent control it was successful in Sweden in the past, but today rent control in Sweden has led to a kind of, because it's within a capitalist economy, if it's not accompanied by massive state building projects, then you will have neither the state nor corporations or developers encouraged to build houses, and you have a shortage. You have massive waiting lists like they do in Sweden. I think, is it 25-year waiting lists in the middle of Stockholm? So that's one side of it. State intervention can introduce problems. Another thing that introduces problems is the other end, which has obviously been dominant, which is the free market idea. The idea that too much intervention has made housing unavailable. This argument was made very, very strongly by Airbnb when they said that they wanted to allow, especially working class first-time homeowners, to increase their income by letting out houses in gentrified urban areas by reducing what was it called again? Long-term rental. That was a law, I think it was New York, where you had to rent for 30 days or more, just a month. But if you got rid of that, then you can rent out with Airbnb. And what that does is, as soon as that becomes available, every landlord in the city, where Airbnb gets the go-ahead, then the landlord has a massive opportunity. They are incentivized to kick people out of their houses because they're so they can open it up to tourists who will pay more money to stay there. So housing is a very, very commodified thing. It's led to masses of things like Airbnb have been very hand in hand with gentrification, because it suits urban developers to gentrify the fuck out of a town and then let it up to Airbnb so that the landlords make money. The people who run all the cafes and tourist spots make a lot of money. Everyone benefits apart from the people who live there, and they are eventually pushed out. So why this is relevant today is because if we're thinking about 28 million people getting evicted, you'd think initially, is that not quite bad for the landlords? Well, no, because landlords often with empty houses have quite a lot of opportunity, because amongst developers and property developers, there is a lot of demand for buying up housing to either convert into production facilities or to use those houses themselves as just a kind of like a tax evasion thing, because the value of housing always goes up on the stock market, so they can buy a bunch of houses and just let their wealth accumulate by doing nothing. So one very good example of that, of use value and exchange value coming into conflict, was in Baltimore near the Johns Hopkins area, which was basically an idea that started about the 70s, when what they would do is they would go into this very predominantly African-American community. It was when pharmaceutical companies wanted to buy up the area around Johns Hopkins, which is a medical school, to build facilities so that they could produce pharmaceuticals. So what they did was they would buy a house and they would board it up. And then because they boarded up a house, that makes the neighborhood look a bit less attractive. The value of all the other houses goes down. So that would give them the opportunity to buy other houses. They would buy one at a time, just loads and loads of houses in these neighborhoods and board them up until it eventually got to the point where all the houses are boarded up, they're not maintained. They eventually get the opportunity to denounce the place as a slum. They say people can no longer live there and people have to move out. That's been a process that happened for about I don't know, 40 or 50 years of just using exchange value to govern decisions around housing. So we know that state housing is quite limited in some senses because it can conflict with private housing. And we know that letting private housing take over basically descends into chaos. So where you need to go from there, and this is where I don't really have much of an answer, is to find a solution for housing that is neither top-down government organization, although that is definitely needed in lots of parts of the world, but is also devoid of that free market incentive, which benefits from people being deprived of shelter. As it turns out, this is a very fundamental distinction between landlords and typical capitalists, because landlords aren't really capitalists in the sense that they don't really exploit labor in the sense to produce value. They just sit there and extract value. So, interesting thing about this whole book here, Capital, it's all about production. It's all about how workers are exploited by bosses for money. The problem with Karl Marx is he wrote this one volume which was readable, the other two which are not. The other two were compiled after he died. And unfortunately, I've tried reading both of them. You definitely could, I'm sure. But it's very boring, very difficult. But what's important about them is one of them is about circulation of capital and the other one is about credit and rent. And people don't always think about this when they think about capitalist exploitation, is the role that rent plays in it. Because think of a restaurant owner. You wouldn't normally think of someone who owns a restaurant as working class. You would think capitalist, exploiting labor for profit. Yes, flux incapacitator, I will be leaving it up. I'll leave it in the unlisted bit, even though it's going to be fairly long. So, what was I saying? Yeah, a restaurant owner. The thing about restaurant owners, especially in a gentrified area of New York, and this is true of quite a lot of small business owners, is the amount of money they make is incredibly low. For the amount of work they do, they're probably, I've heard stories of restaurant owners who say they make below minimum wage because of the amount of money that they make from their business going straight to the landlord, to rent. So there's a very interesting capitalist relation there, that capitalists and rentiers don't actually always get along. This is even true with what's happening today, because if you have 28 million people facing evictions, that's not productive for the economy. Most businesses don't like having homeless employees. You know, if your employees can't wash their clothes or shower before work or have had a good night's sleep, what's going to happen? Like that's unproductive, right? So the thing with landlords is their existence, and you can't really overstate it, is they are useless. They are parasites. There is no need for landlords. If you look at London, do you know who owns like more residential properties in London than anyone else? Is not any self-made billionaire or thing like that. Let's look at the guy who is called the biggest landlord in London. You can probably tell by his name what his background is. This guy. Oh, he's actually yeah, him. Hugh Grosvenor. This little. Am I showing this on screen? Yeah, I am. Yeah, this bedwetter here, this guy who's probably, I think he's the same age as me, but he looks like a bit of a tyke. So, and that's all inherited. He is the biggest landlord in London because he inherited it. And that really tells you about the origin of rentier capital. First of all, where is the free market in all of this? Before the Industrial Revolution, there were lots of areas of land around the UK that were technically owned by lords, but were basically left alone for most of their lives most of their time left to the peasants for most of their lives. Apart from that, you would have like villages and small communities where people would just build houses for each other, and the people who owned them were the people who lived in them. So, for the Industrial Revolution to take place, you needed a lot of land. So that was when what they called the Enclosures Act happened, where people were just literally thrown off the land, and then a bunch of fences were put around them, and they were suddenly private property. And that was it. So to this day, because rent and property is inherently something that you would inherit, inherently inherited, that leftover still exists. That leftover feudalism and still lingers in the landletting economy. There's nothing libertarian about it. There's nothing fucking free market about it. It's feudal. In Scotland, over half of the land is owned by less than 500 families. So less than 0.001% of the population owns half of the land. And that land, much of that land is just doing nothing. It's just used for landlords to go on walks. Or it's just there. And that's very unproductive. That's room where you could build houses. That's how much of the land do the monarchs own? I don't know, too much probably. More than none of it, which is too much. So that's really the kind of crisis that we're in right now, and it's perpetual. There is no free market without crisis, and there is no free housing market without housing crisis. Capitalism cannot accept shelter as a human right. It wholeheartedly rejects that. To an extent, it might benefit from putting people in houses from time to time. After the Great Depression, the solution was effectively, according to politicians at the time, was to basically jumpstart the economy again by getting people to buy houses and fill those houses with things. So that was when the suburbanization projects followed the 1930s, 1940s and 50s. That's why they were such a big thing back then, was because you revived the market by giving people something that they all needed. They all needed houses. And then what you did was you made those houses fairly big so that they could start consuming and filling those houses with shit that they might not have necessarily had any use for. The consequence was, again, free markets and profit motives incentivizing the way those houses were built. Was that whole suburbanization, houses that are very far apart, very far away from the cities, that is very deliberate, because urban working classes are much more restive than rural ones. I'm sure you know that. Rural people vote Conservative, Republican. Urban people vote Labour, Democrat. So there was a very political incentive there. Policymakers used to say that debt-encumbered homeowners, especially suburban ones, don't go on strike. So there's a complete politicization of housing as well. That's the role that housing plays. It's played in a way that preserves private interests and doesn't give a fuck about whether or not people live in them or not. That's not the point. It's whether or not they can return on an investment. So, I think that segment was a lot better than the first one. Do you agree, chat? Did I do better? Is my public speaking power level charged up? Andrew Yang with yes. Does anyone have any questions on housing? Fucking. I think it's also because there are no chud Nazis in the chat now, although I don't know if they were. Heinz is still here. Oh my god. How are you doing, Heinz? I studied sociology, Felix. Yeah, I know he probably is normally, just as a weird name. Everyone with a Z in their name is a Nazi to me. What do you mean, where do we get the money for it from? community housing projects. I know they're quite popular in Germany, but yeah, the idea that it's neither top-down government stuff is, it's not quite social housing because it's not delivered from the top down. This is something I don't know quite as much about, but it's done at a more like devolved local level so that it can respond to community needs as well as just housing needs. Because a government just sees, well, there are this many people in the country, we need this many houses. But community housing can also work in a way that it's especially really bad in local scenes because you'll have houses that are built right next door to fucking music venues, and then you get the people complaining about the music venue, and then the music venue has to close, and it's all very clumsy. Yeah, definitely drop the housing question. I haven't read it, but I know it's I've heard it's good. Do I have a backlog of things to talk about, or do I just think of them as I go? I have a backlog in my head that I've assembled over 10 years, but forget some of it. Within okay. Yeah, someone link the Discord to them. The Discord's in the YouTube description. Critical Hippo, you asked a good question. Fuck, you're good. I can say things to that. Within capitalism, how do you shift power from shareholders more to workers? Well, Critical Hippo, have you heard of zombie capitalism? Zombie capitalism is effectively when corporations, it's mostly big corporations, are not functioning quite so well in profits, but they are they're not really incentivized to make profits anymore. What they're instead disposed to do is just to survive. Just when a company is not making quite the return it can. This especially happened with car companies not a few decades ago, where they just couldn't sell enough cars to keep up with people with to satisfy their shareholders who were more driven towards financial sectors. So I think Ford for a time made more money on currency swapping than they did from selling cars. What that actually leaves us with, though, is an insane amount of corporations all over Europe and America who are completely subsidized by the state. The taxpayer keeps them up. The stock market itself is state subsidized. It always has been. Every time they fuck up, there's a $1 trillion bailout. Each country, the European Union, comes together one time in 20 years to agree on something, which is the bank should be bailed out by taxpayers. So that is a very good mandate to say, if these companies cannot survive without public funding, then why are they not public? And there was one policy I really wouldn't. I think if I was ever going to talk to Vosh, this is what I would bring up, is when he argues worker co-ops. I'm assuming most people who are here know of Vosh because he's kind of like the one who shouted me out. So if you are familiar with his arguments on co-ops, it's all correct. It's all they outperform private industries, etc., etc. What I think he falls short on is every time he brings it up, conservatives will say, well, those co-ops are voluntary. What you want to do is you want to force every company to become a cooperative. And then he kind of says, like, he kind of goes on this kind of, well, yeah, it's better for people. But there is a way to bridge that gap, the policy gap. Again, like liberals like to hear about policy. So there was a policy that was proposed by the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn's, which I think was probably the most progressive policy I've ever seen. It was the idea that if a corporation or a big business, I think it was above 500 employees or more, if they found themselves in a situation where they were either in liquidation or if they wanted to go public so that they could issue stocks, or if they were in a situation where they needed bailout money from the state. There might have been one other clause. If they wanted to offshore, if they wanted to move themselves offshore and move their tax base offshore, then the policy was that if they wanted to do that, if they suddenly were in this position where they had to depend on the state, then they had to go through an option where they had to run it by the workers, and the workers would have the option to democratically decide whether they wanted to own the company instead. Now that is democratic. It's fair because the people who pay for what the company is requiring are getting to own a bit of what they pay for. And it's fucking awesome. Like that's how you with any good faith actor in the co-op's debate, that's what you throw at them. You throw at them the fact, you don't need to bring up Corbyn, don't need to bring up Labour, none of that. No, just to own, to be the owners, to be the board of directors, Critical Hippo, not shareholders, owners. To be collectively owners. So typically, corporation, big fucking thing, full of, it's got the chairman. Typically a corporation is directed, you say, maybe not owned, directed by about 20 people on average. The board of directors, that's 20 people. And they decide the direction of the company. They decide who gets paid what. They decide the bonuses. They're the ones who say, we should move this company offshore, etc., etc. When I say owns, I mean that board of directors, those 20 people, become everyone. Manus, I think that was a kind of aim. Yeah. I think more than 20% of companies right now are depending on state subsidies. Absolutely. So, where was I? So that board of directors in a worker co-op is everyone. To think about this in practical terms, there are some co-ops that do this. Say Monday to Thursday, you work, you do your job, whatever your job was initially. Friday, you go in and you manage. Or you direct. You don't manage, you direct. You do ownership. You do what the board of directors does. You vote on decisions about who should get paid what. You vote on decisions of company direction, things like that. You are the owner. Now, that's not getting rid of hierarchy. There are still managers who are obviously, it's not really the Professor Wolf model. Wolf bases this on companies that already exist. He's not like a fucking company inventor, or he's commenting on what exists. He's commenting on models of places like Mondragon in Spain, or software companies in New Zealand. This is a model that actually originated in Scotland. It was Robert Owen who was, I think, the earliest person to champion worker co-op ideas. That might just be my nationalism creeping in, but yeah, you own the fruits of your own produce. Would a co-op like that, would they decide, if you're arguing with a racist, would they decide to move a business offshore to exploit cheap labor? Would they fire themselves to do that? No. And they don't do that. Would they, there's very little evidence for this happening, but just to give a kind of pretend it's true, would they fire a bunch of local workers and hire immigrant ones for lower wages? No. Not that regular corporations do that anyway, but there you go. If you're talking to an environmentalist, would they decide to allow production to be carried out in a way that threatens the health of the citizens? No, because they are the citizens. They're not exempt in the same way from environmental consequences in the same way that billionaires are. If you're talking to a fucking idiot, not an idiot, just a not political person, worker co-ops, would they deliberately produce products that were built to break so that people could keep on buying them in a sequence of additions? No, because they don't, because the producers and the consumers are the same thing. The people who work for that company are also going to be the consumers of the products. So it is a thing in Germany, yeah. Alex. It's a thing in football teams. And as far as the quality control goes, yeah, like how many times have Bayern Munich and Dortmund been top of the two finalists, and or at least one of them been finalists in the Champions League? Those teams are owned by the fans. And when you go to a German football match, I don't care much for football, but German football matches are amazing. The fans are so invested because they have stake in their companies, in their teams. The same way that worker satisfaction improves in a co-op because it's their baby, you know? There is an argument that a lot of market failures will be forced out of worker co-ops whilst capitalism institutions still exist to compete with. What does that mean? So these... Yeah, environmental damage, I don't know, like... I think the argument there with environmental damage caused by co-ops is they could, if you're a worker like this isn't the be-all end-all of solving all the economic problems. If you're a co-op, you still have issues like if you find yourself striking very, I don't know, shale gas, very profitable, very destructive, you might do it at the to the detriment of all the other parts in the world that are around you and eventually yourself. Yeah, then the point is that they don't have to, though. There's a potential to educate that out of the people who work there. There's not that potential in capitalism. Capitalism is about growth. It needs to grow. It needs to grow because the whole point of running a business in capitalism is to satisfy the demands of your shareholders. So they have to do it. They have no choice. If they fail, someone else replaces them. That's it. The system will always do that. It will always have to grow. It'll always have to extract more resources from the earth. It'll always have to pump out more fumes than it did the year before. It will always do that. An economy that was a network of worker cooperatives would not need to do that. It could do that, but it doesn't have to. Yeah. The best way to know if you're arguing with someone in good faith is the co-ops thing. Like, that's how you separate someone who basically, the only argument that conservatives go to then is they'll just say it's not perfect. There's not enough evidence that co-ops are doing this and that, or just some appeal to property rights. The really great thing about cooperatives is it's more libertarian than libertarians are. It's more freedom than people who tend to preach freedom talk about. It's more personal responsibility than people who preach personal responsibility like to go for. So yeah, it does all the things that capitalism says it can do, but better, as far as we know, as far as the evidence goes, which is quite a lot. In a slow transition, there's competitive pressure to exploit. Yeah, which is why Sad Boy Electric Noise. It's a good time. Now is a good time for it, because if you pass that policy, a lot of corporations would need to, more than a fifth, would need to, I don't know the exact number for it, but quite a lot of them would need to switch over, because quite a lot of them are already subsidized by the state. Taxpayers are already propping up corporations. So, did I answer your question? Who asked that question? I don't remember what the question was. Yeah, Felix, that would be weird. Although no, Flux, I've just said how the transition happens. What? I just did that. That was my whole the policy of corporations that find themselves dependent on state money should have to go through a process where the workers get to choose whether they want to run the company themselves. I think the policy, someone asked what the policy was. The policy was called the Worker Cooperative Fund, I'm pretty sure. Because that was where the money would come from. Basically like quantitative easing for... No, I'm not. I don't know. I'm a bit like I don't really have much conflict with anarchists. I would call myself a communist, though. The reason, I mean, anarchism and like if you're the kind of anarchist who can't really see eye to eye with communists or vice versa, then I don't really. I would maybe find that a bit untrustworthy because. Oh, I don't know, Pratt. Fucking, that's a difficult question, Flux. I'm very sorry. I'll think about it. Not now. Yeah, as far as anarchism and communism, like obviously anarchism is the abolition of hierarchy, but unjust hierarchy, not all hierarchy. Although I know certainly the anarchists who hate communists will say things like disregarding road signs counts as anarchism. I'm not for that because the problem with cooperatives is, say you've got a whole world, the whole world is a network of cooperatives. Then what do you do? How do you stop? What do you do when one cooperative strikes gold, just finds itself sitting on a very valuable natural resource, whilst the one next to it goes through a drought? So, or runs into poverty. How do you stop one getting massively richer than the other? How do you make sure that this entire global network of cooperatives is operating in a way that is not going to push us over the threshold for global warming? Then you would. That's where I think you need some kind of state to regulate that. Like even, I would not shy away from saying an international level. Alex, if that happens, I'd like to see. We'll see how it plays out. I don't know. I don't know if they're offshoring their own company and then just become the directors. Well, I don't know. I have no idea how that would. I don't know if that's kind of genius, I suppose. If you ever want to go into a worker co-op and do that, I don't know if that's ever happened. If it has, I'd love to know. Anyway, holy shit, my throat is very, very sore. Well, I don't know, Alex. I don't know. Maybe you could go into a worker co-op and try and propagandize and see how it goes. Try and motivate them to do that. Again, that's why I'm all for it. That's why I think movements like this need to be international as well. There's no point in worker co-ops here if they're all just working with metal that was mined in the Congo by child slaves. But as far as our local policy, yeah. What do you mean? What do you mean? What's my background, Clara? Like the wall, or? Oh, I don't. I mean, I've tended to call myself a communist for most of my life. Well, not most of my life, but most of my political life. Critical hip hop. I've been good at improvising on the piano before, but not recently. Anyway, I've definitely run out of segments, and I've enjoyed myself. Oh, just in case, I think I heard like 2 super chats in that, so I should go over them. Let's have a look. See if there were questions I needed to answer or whatnot. I don't really come from a leftist family. My mum is like center left, I guess. My dad's political views are weird. Let's see. Monetization. Oh no, that's the one I already read. So the one super chat with a comment was the one I already mentioned. Yes, it's very late here. I'm up at 2 a.m. because I'm an insomniac. But yes, it's time to call this old gathering to an end. I've had fun. Did you guys have fun? Amazing. Okay. Yes. I love you all, etc., etc. Yes, it'll go up on my channel. It'll go up on the streams section just next to the other one. Why not? In case any fucking weirdos want to watch me doing this for 3 hours. Prepared content coming very soon. Holy shit. I'm doing the next one like tomorrow, so that'll be better. That's definitely my favorite zone. This is a bit weird to me. We'll see. I might do gaming streams. That would be fun. If I have 2 monitors, I'd love to do gaming streams. Just fucking kill some trolls while people say things to me. All right. Night, night, folks. Solidarity.